Okay, it's 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Can we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Marcus?
Here.
Trustee Weekly is absent. Trustee McAvoy?
Present.
Vice President Wells?
Here.
President Lawson?
Here. Welcome everybody to the September 25th board meeting. Si necesita traducción en español, por favor llama al 978-890-5137 y presione 8377-041, el signo de número para la contraseña. Si asiste a la reunión en persona y necesita interpretación al español, solicite un transmisor situado al fondo de la sala. Thank you. The public is encouraged to speak to the board on issues of concern, whether or not the issue is on the agenda. To address the board, please complete a speaker's card available at the back of the room, and you can bring it up here to Evelyn. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes. As a reminder, the board cannot have a discussion on public comments. However, we may direct the superintendent to follow up. Okay, that brings us to changes to the agenda. Are there any changes? Nope. Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Oral communication, we do have a speaker's card for Cindy Meek, who is on Zoom. Hi, Cindy, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. The screen is switching. I don't know, can you guys see me?
Your screen is off, but we see your little.
Oh yeah, I don't know why it's that way. So this is kind of weird, but anyway, it was kind of funky to get in. It turned out I needed like a workplace Zoom account. So I ended up coming through my school email. So I don't know if the public people can actually get in, to tell you the truth, because I tried from my personal email. So anyway, so I wanted to speak with you about the air conditioning situation at Kennedy. And my name's Cindy Meek. I'm a teacher at Kennedy, and I'm representing the teachers at Kennedy. At the last board meeting, there was a whole discussion and slideshow about it, and we're very concerned about the priorities. It seems like the priorities should be to determine how many students can we help, and how many students can we help with the most impact. Kennedy has the largest school in the district. We're at 820 students now. We were at 751 last year. We are also a Title I school. And as you probably know, our test results are not that great. Over 50% of our students are not at standard for ELA, and over 60% at math. And the learning during these hot days just doesn't happen. If you can imagine, if you're somewhere and there's no air conditioning and it's 89 degrees and you're supposed to sit there, listen to a teacher, do homework, be on Chromebooks while you're sweating, it's not conducive to an environment for students to learn. There are way too many days where it's hot now. This is not a new thing. This has been ongoing for a number of years. I appreciated that Ms. McAvoy came to a union meeting 2 years ago to ask for our support for the bond measure, in which the union did support the bond measure, and our number one criteria was AC. And yet here we are almost 2 years later and nothing's been done yet. I understand you have a plan now, but we're very concerned because we don't see this happening very quickly. And when I look at the priority list, I just don't see where Kennedy's going to fall in at the top of that list. So I really think that Ms. Marquez, since you're going to be on the board next year and Mr. Weekly's absent, we really need you to carry the torch on this AC situation. And when it becomes December, January, February, and it's cold and raining, no one thinks about AC. And these things don't become a priority anymore. But yet, it's going to be hot come beginning of May. So May, June, September, October, you're talking almost 4 months out of the school year now that it's very hot for students to learn. And if, as a district, you're serious about improving test scores and closing the achievement gap, then we have to be serious about creating a workplace, school place for all students and all teachers so they can teach and students can learn. So I really hope that when you see the bids come in and the priorities, that you're really focused on the larger schools, which would be Kennedy and then Hoover. They're at 638. They're also a Title I school. So Kennedy and Hoover should be the top two schools that get AC, regardless of how long it's going to take. It needs to be a priority. That's my take on that.
Thank you. Your 3 minutes are up.
Thank you.
So, I mean, as we talked about it, I think it was our last meeting, there is a process for this. Unfortunately, bond and school construction take a long time, and we can't just push it through like we can at home or something like that. Definitely understand the heat issue. I have a son at Kennedy. I'm very familiar with it. I've been in back to school night at Kennedy, sweating at 8:30 p.m. So, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, Rick or Dr. Baker, can you remind us, we'll be hearing back from our consultant in October, or right? Because so I will say, I just want to say, Cindy, thank you very much. Certainly we're working as quickly as we can. I think all of us wish that we could have done something sooner. But here we are. So we're going to work as quickly as we can. But I think if you listen to the last board report, there's some technical issues, logistical issues, and then also if we're tearing down particular classrooms and buildings to rebuild them as part of the bond measure that'll happen over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, we don't want to spend a ton of money on classrooms in the interim. So there's a lot of moving parts, including we even had conversations possibly bringing in some portables at different school sites where we could do that in the interim. And then at some sites, depending upon what's already there, we may be able to do more in the interim, but we're supposed to get a more detailed report on all of this, I believe, in October. Yes. Yeah, so second meeting in October over the first meeting in November. So anyway, I think we all completely appreciate, when I think we all got the emails about the 89-degree classrooms. I mean, clearly that's not conducive to learning. And I'm really sorry. I mean, I just want to say that. And, but we will, the good news is the voters did vote in Measure S, and thank you for the union support, because that did make a difference. And we'll get there as quickly as we can. So thanks.
That's all we have for oral communications. So we can move on to our school and community reports, our mental health report.
And this evening we have our lead mental health specialist, Ana Paula Garay, and she is going to present us with a report. Welcome, Ana Paula.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Just so you know, I am accompanied by several other speakers who will join me in presenting all of the data this evening, and I'll let them introduce themselves as they come up little by little. So the data I'm going to present tonight is for all of last year's data. So anytime we measure services delivered, how many staff we have on campuses, this is all for last year, not reflective of who we have on sites currently. So there are 3 parts to this data. The first part is the clinical data. This is the kind of the meat and potatoes, all of the services that counselors provided directly to students on our school sites. The second part is survey data. We surveyed students and teachers and parents this year. There was the parent survey was new, and then it was a repeat of the student and teacher one. So we were able to see growth with those 2 populations. And then the last section is going to talk about kind of what's new this year, what's coming down the pipeline in terms of programming and funding. And I know that there's a lot of interest to maybe learn a little bit more about the efficacy or evidence-based practices of having a school-based mental health program. So I've asked our Stanford partners sitting behind me to kind of help me compile some of that data. Having school-based mental health programs, kind of in-house programs, now that we've been here for 3 years and a lot of efforts were made when we all came back from COVID, now there's really a lot stronger data that we can look at and kind of see is what we're doing, what the data is showing that we should be doing. Should we be refocusing efforts? So we're going to be looking at that and sharing some articles with all of you, and then getting some feedback to see if there's any additional lines of research that we should be looking into. So to start off our clinical services, this is who we have at our school sites last year. So our CSD are the district counselors. The One Life is the partnership we have with One Life. Part of those hours, 90 of those hours last year, were paid for by RCEF, but the hours were fulfilled by One Life. So there were still One Life counselors on our campus. Star Vista, which is a contract we don't pay for. And then our intern program started last year. So we had our first intern who was at MIT for 20 hours a week. And this is how many students were seen for every type of service. So we had over 1,800 students seen for a check-in. This is unique, unduplicated students. 675 students received individual therapy, 299 students received group therapy, and 179 students were seen for crisis. And these are the 5 types of services that we have provided at our school sites. So we have tier 1 interventions, which are typically kind of SEL, school-wide lunch bunch kind of things, check-ins, group therapy, individual therapy, and crisis interventions. So if we're thinking of like a tiered approach, going from tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, that's kind of how we go. Tier 1 check-ins are kind of at the bottom, group and individual kind of in the middle, and crisis at the top. And I will pass it on to Marianne, who's going to help present tier 1 and check-in data.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Marianne, and I am the mental health counselor at North Star and Henry Ford. Today I'm going to be presenting data on group services that we provided, tier 1 services we provided, and check-ins. So to start off, we're going to be talking about tier 1 interventions. So for the tier 1 interventions, we provided over 2,800 tier 1 interventions to students. This is an incredible amount because we've increased our tier 1 services by 56% over the last school year. Also, the graph, as you can see, shows that 82% of the services, the tier 1 services provided, were by an RCSD clinician, and around 35% of those services were provided by One Life clinicians. And then, okay, we're going to be talking about types of tier 1 interventions. So for tier 1 interventions, it's broken down into 4 different categories, which are SEL, school clubs, lunch bunches, and the other category. On the chart, you can see that we provided a large amount of SEL interventions, over 1,500 lessons taught across all the schools. And in addition to that, the school club category includes things like Peacemakers, Mindful Art Club, GSA, and then our other category that's on this graph includes our canine companions, student counseling meetings, peer mediations, assemblies, and parent workshops. So lots of different tier 1 services we provided. Now moving on to check-ins. So we had just over 3,900 check-ins take place, and we had just over 1,800 students who were serviced with check-ins. Something that we saw is that there were more students seen for check-ins and less students needed multiple check-ins. This is a really good move in a positive direction because it means students aren't needing to come back over and over and over again for check-ins. In addition, another win we saw is that the average length of our check-ins was reduced to 25 minutes. And this year we're hoping to bring it down even more to 20 minutes a check-in. So that's one of the goals that we have. All right. Check-ins by grade level. So as you can see on the chart, the grade levels that are utilizing the check-ins the most are 4th graders, 5th graders, and 8th graders. This is different from 2 years ago, where we saw that 5th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders had the highest need for check-ins. And now we're going to be talking about the referral reasons. So the highest reason for check-in referral was peer relationships, anxiety, and emotional regulation. This is again different compared to 2 years ago, where we saw the highest categories being peer relationship, anxiety, and the other category. And then in terms of referral sources, we're seeing a lot of self-referrals, and that continues to be the highest referral source for 3 years in a row. This is really great because it shows that students know how to request the support, and they also feel very comfortable requesting support from a counselor, and they feel comfortable enough to ask for help. Okay, moving on to group therapy. So with group therapy, there were over 299, no, there's exactly 299 students in group therapy over the course of the last school year, and a total of 88 groups that happened across the whole district. Each group met for an average of 8 sessions, and 50% of those groups were led by an RCSD clinician, and 46% of those groups were led by a One Life clinician. Okay, grade levels for groups. So something that we saw in terms of grade levels is that we had the most participation from 1st through 4th grade, compared to 2 years ago where we saw the most participation from 1st, 2nd, and 5th grade. I also wanted to note that it is, as you can see on the chart, the middle school grades tend to be on the lower side, and that's developmentally normal compared to their elementary school peers, for middle schoolers to participate less in groups. All right. And now we're going to be talking about referral reasons for groups. The highest categories for referral reasons were social skills, peer relationships, and family issues. 2 years ago, though, we saw the highest categories being social skills, peer relationships, and behavior. A trend that we found is that there's less of a need for groups on behavior and more need for support around family issues. All right. And then for referral sources for groups, we received the highest referrals from teachers. And this is the 2nd year in a row that this has happened. And that's really good news because it shows that teachers are really valuing the service and they see the benefit to having group counseling on campus. We also saw a huge increase in parent referrals this year for group, which is also really good to see. It shows that parents are being more willing to have their students attend a group as opposed to only wanting their child to be in individual therapy. So they're also seeing the benefits to group. All right, group outcomes. So as far as group therapy outcomes go, 75% of the students that were in group were able to meet their goals. And then, as you can see, there's a school year ended category. And that category, so a lot of the students in that category, in those groups, started toward the end of the school year. So not all of the students were able to complete their goals of the group, but they did show progress. It's just, it happened to take place toward the end of the school year, so they couldn't finish it. And then that is it for me. Diane will be coming up to talk about individual.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Marianne left it at a good size. So we're going to be talking about individual therapy and the data regarding individual therapy. And it's really interesting. So last year, more students received individual therapy, and the length of treatment was 11 sessions on average, which is right on target because the goal is to have one specific goal and to work on that goal, and that make big impact and influence behavior, influence self-esteem, school, influence other areas as well. So that was really powerful. So we both years have been on track, the average being 11 sessions. And individual therapy by grade level. So last year, 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 8th grade tied for number of students receiving individual therapy. 2 years ago, 8th grade and 5th grade and 7th grade had the most number of students receiving individual therapy. And for me, when I look at that, it seems that the younger students are getting more and more comfortable with the idea of therapy and prevention early on and the concept of therapy. So that's really exciting. Individual therapy, oh, all right, by provider. So there were 675 students that received therapy. And I was saying that every 11 sessions, let's see, sorry, there we go. Referral reason. Last year, anxiety, behavior, and emotional regulation were the top areas of need for support. And 2 years ago, not surprising, anxiety, behavior, and family changes were areas where most support was needed. And so anxiety and behavior seem to be, again, the areas that need most support. And I think that that's really, it makes a lot of sense because when you're anxious, you don't make necessarily the best choices. And that leads to maybe not the best choices in behavior. And so if you address the anxiety and work with the anxiety or the behavior, it it helps. It's really effective. It's interconnected. And I just love that the younger students are now more open to participating in therapy. There we go. So referral source, parent referrals went up last year. And it means that parents are feeling more comfortable accessing and know how to access um, mental health support. And it's grown also because there's trust. They've seen the counselors at school sites. They've heard parents comment about the work and they feel more comfortable. That 44% of the referrals last year were made by parents, and that's pretty exciting. Outcomes. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about outcomes. So 44% of goals that student had were met. And there's a category here that says the student goals were met, or the school year ended. The school year ended category doesn't reflect progress made. So maybe it wasn't progress on, the second goal, but there was progress made. So it's not necessarily reflective. And um, that's what I wanted to point out. I think that really, this is something to be really excited about and proud of. Crisis interventions by provider. So 179 students were in crisis for a total of 287 crisis interventions. And the total time spent by counselors were 330 hours. Average time per crisis was about 69 minutes. And the data, if you look at the pie, if you will, the data is reflective of interventions, who provided them. And so some administrators did provide some crisis interventions, but they're not included in this data. District counselors provided the bulk of the crisis interventions because they were the most experienced to do so. Crisis by grade level. So middle school crisis intervention was the highest if you look at the 8th grade for the 3rd year in a row. Lower grades tended to have more behavioral crisis situations. For example, maybe throwing things or maybe refusing directions given, eloping, that kind of a thing. And the referral source, teachers and administrators were the ones that referred the most. Likely, maybe they were seeing something out at recess lunch or maybe in the classroom. And so they were the ones that made the most referrals. So last year. And the types of crisis intervention. So there, if you notice on the chart, extreme emotional dysregulation was very high. And that is something to look at. That was last year, the highest type of crisis. It's a crisis, but it is a crisis that you consider a crisis because it lasts more than 45 minutes. A student can't regulate to go back to class within 45 minutes. I remember a student, for example, a first grader, refusing to go into the classroom at the beginning of the school day because mom had dropped her off with her newborn sister, and she was an only child prior to that and wasn't going inside. And so it took over an hour to be able to regulate and go back to class. Worked with mom, came up with the plan. And by the way, one part of the plan was mom not coming with baby to drop her off. And so I think this is the kind of crisis intervention that you would call extreme emotional dysregulation. And level of risk was low in most crisis intervention situations. 240 students assessed for crisis intervention were low, and there were 3 that were high, 34 medium, and 10 medium high. So that is really interesting. So most of the intervention work was done with emotional dysregulation, not being able to regulate after 45 minutes and be able to be in class. Outcomes. So last year, we had more than 5 students hospitalized. 3 of them were referred by a counselor. There was one example where the same day, there were 3 students that were hospitalized that same day. That was not the norm. And so I really appreciate your time. I'm going to hand over the mic to Ana Paula, and thank you. Well,
And just to highlight on the crisis, we have, for example, the one day that we had 3 hospitalizations. One was initiated by a counselor, one was initiated by a safety check that an administrator called for, and then one was initiated by a parent. So while it says 3, those are the ones that were counselor facilitated, but we actually had more students, about double that, actually hospitalized for a minimum of 3 days up to 10 this last school year. So attendance was a data point that you all asked for last year. And so we changed our data collecting practices so we would be able to get you some of this data. So the average attendance for students in counseling, so that means individual and group therapy, because those are the ones that are having consistent ongoing touch points with a counselor that we would hope we would see the most amount of improvement in counseling, was 92.3%, which I think is a little above the average from, I think, what I looked at the data. If not, it's right around there. So when I'm looking at kind of who made the improvement, I'm looking again specifically at those who received individual and group therapy, and only for those that we had attendance data for the year before and the year they received counseling. So we could have a comparison point because not all students were enrolled in both years. We had a lot of newcomers, for example, receiving individual and group therapy. So as you can see, we had a good number of students improve their attendance, anywhere from 5 to 9%. 24 improved 10 to 14%, and we did have 7 students who had a significant improvement in attendance. For the most part, the attendance changes were anywhere from like -1 to +2 attendance. So most of the kids were kind of in the maintaining, but the kids that were really struggling with attendance were able to make significant changes. And so just some key takeaways from our clinical data. We did have a decrease in counseling hours from 2 years ago to last year, but the amount of services roughly that we were able to provide roughly stayed the same. And I think that's a testament to having the program continue year after year. We're able to be much more efficient with our protocols and our systems. There's less training we have to do with onboarding partners because we just keep doing it. We have our district leads at school sites that are able to manage and they're more familiar with those roles. So we were able to provide the same amount of services last year. Really excited that parent referrals have increased. It's something that we have seen steadily increased, both for individual and for group therapy. And then we do have less students expressing suicidal ideation. However, when they are expressing it, it tends to be more severe. So just something for us to kind of keep an eye on and continue to take seriously and take appropriate precautions. But it is good to see that we have less kids kind of on that borderline coming to the counseling centers. And I will pass it off to Dr. Bott.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Apurva Bhatt, and I'm a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist at Stanford. And I'm really excited to talk to you just briefly about the Redwood City Sequoia Mental Health Collaborative. So as part of my role at Stanford, I do a lot of different things. One of the things that I do is I provide school clinical consultations in various local school districts, including Redwood City. And within the Redwood City School District, we have a couple of different arms to this partnership. One part of it involves the Center for Youth Mental Health and Wellbeing, where we provide clinical consultation to the schools, where I have a couple of child and adolescent psychiatry fellows who are in their last year of training, who go and provide individual level, student level consultations for students that have been identified by the school as needing support or who might be struggling with a mental health issue. These are typically students who are in the tier 3 category, who are really struggling, maybe not coming to school or having serious behaviors. And so it's a really nice way for us to see those kids early. As many of you know, there are long wait times for anyone to see a child psychiatrist, really. And so that's some of the work that we do. We also provide consultation to some of the mental health leaders as well, including meeting with Ana Herrera and Ana Paula, including others. There's also a research arm to this collaborative, which I'm sure Kristen can speak more to, that does a lot of really important work within the district. In hearing all of this data, this just warms my heart because I do see those kids in the ER who are waiting way too long before they come to us. Oftentimes families are not sure if they want their child to receive mental health care in a mental health care setting. It's a really tough thing to accept as a parent. And so to see all of this wonderful work done by you all, it makes me happy because I think that early intervention, well, not I think, data has shown that early intervention is very, very powerful. I'd just like to also highlight, we've done a lot of consultations over the years. And this past year, there was a kid. So the other part of my job at Stanford is I work in the early psychosis clinics on the adult side and on the child side, where I see children, teenagers experiencing psychotic disorders, oftentimes schizophrenia spectrum or bipolar disorder. Can anyone guess how long my wait time would be in that clinic? It was 6 months. I've got it down to 3 months. That's a really long time if your child is experiencing psychosis, to wait for someone to do an assessment and get them help. Oftentimes those kids end up in the ER. As part of this collaborative, there was a child identified in one of the Redwood City elementary schools who was struggling with new onset psychosis symptoms. And it was really difficult for the school to be managing this. It was really hard for the parents. They weren't sure where to go. And luckily the mental health counselor and mental health team identified this student early, and we were able to see that student within 1 week. That is incredible work that's being done there, and being able to get that child hooked into services very early was very impactful. I did hear back a couple months that kiddo is doing really well in school now, attending and not having so many of those scary experiences. So it's very meaningful work, and I feel really lucky to be able to be a part of this. one thing that I will share is I think a lot of folks are not aware of what is a child psychiatrist. And there's a lot of assumptions about what we do. And so I just thought I'd briefly share about a little bit about our training and the power of having a fellow in the schools in addition to myself. So a child and adolescent psychiatrist goes to medical school. So they do their undergrad. Then within medical school, they will rotate on the various medical specialties, gain experience, know how to identify various medical conditions that might be presenting in an individual. After that, we do 4 years of adult psychiatry residency, where we work with mostly adults and also gain more experience in both therapy and medication management, including medical workup for mental health disorders. And then we go on to do another 6,000 hours in fellowship. At the end of all of that, we are individuals who have 23,000 hours of clinical experience. And there's not that many of us. We are kind of rare. We're known in medicine as the unicorns in our field. And so just to be able to have someone like that in your school available is very powerful and one of the most powerful ways of early intervention. Okay, I'll pass it back.
Before I go into the next data, I want to just really highlight the really valuable work Dr. Bott's team has done for our students. The first year, we had 1 fellow at Roosevelt. The second year, we had 1 fellow at Hoover. Last year, we were able to have 2 fellows, 1 at Hoover and 1 at MIT. And this year, we continue to have 2 fellows, 1 at Hoover and 1 at MIT. And unfortunately, this is the last year of this partnership. So we are kind of in conversations to learn more. What would the cost be of keeping this partnership going? Where could we get funding for this? In addition to that fabulous example, we, have students who aren't coming to school. So it's really hard to assess them when they're in school, right? And so the psychiatrists are able to make accommodations and figure out how to get that child assessed. Additionally, when the psychiatrist has made a recommendation, whether it be for a diagnosis or medication, they're able to speak to the pediatrician, right? And so sometimes pediatricians don't like to hear from us at school. However, when a fellow MD calls and is like, this is the assessment I did, this is my recommendation, it gives it more gravitas that sometimes we're unable to provide by ourselves. And so really collaborating with their team, their fellows have just been godsends. The schools really, really appreciate and love them. And so we've been really lucky to have this partnership for 4 years. So moving on to our survey results. So like I mentioned earlier, we had 3 surveys. We had student, staff, and parent. For the students, we did 4th through 8th grade. We wanted them to be able to answer the questions independently, just so that there was no undue pressure from staff helping them. And we had about almost 1,800 responses from students, and then about 130 from teachers and 190 from parents. This was kind of the breakdown of how many students from each school filled it out. It's a little deceiving. Obviously, Orion only has like 100 4th and 5th graders, so their numbers would be lower. So it is kind of proportional to the enrollment numbers. This is what grade levels they were in that responded. We asked who received support from their counselor, left it kind of vague to see what they would say. The highest schools were Adelante, Henry Ford, and Taft. And the lowest schools were Clifford, MIT, and North Star. At North Star, we did lose our district counselor in September, and so that position remained open for the year. So there was less counseling available for the North Star students last year than originally planned. We asked if they knew who their counselors were on campus, and we did see a jump from 80 to 89% over 1 year. So we have almost 90% of our students who know who their counselors are on campus, which is really impressive. Almost 87% of them know where to go to find them. So again, we saw improvement there 1 year from 1 year to the next. We also saw growth in them feeling comfortable talking to their counselor. And then we asked them some questions. So if you spoke with a counselor, what's one thing you learned? There were a couple different categories. Some of them mentioned, learning more about emotion regulation and SEL. They learned how to better interact with their classmates and friends. They felt more prepared for middle school and high school. Some of our K-5s have some SEL lessons geared towards entering middle school, and some of our middle schools have groups and SEL lessons geared towards entering high school. And then others, right? Students who were like, I didn't see one, but I'd like to. Or a student that said they didn't know how to. Has having a counselor on campus changed anything for you? It was really valuable to students to have a trusted adult on campus. they felt comfortable talking to, that they felt better after talking with. It contributed to a sense of safety and belonging. And we had a lot of students who recognized that, you know what, maybe they didn't see one, but they saw that it positively affected their classmates, which was just really nice insight to hear from 10 and 11-year-olds. Is there anything you wish the counselors at your school would do to help you or your classmates? They continue to want peer relationship support, which, as we saw from some of the counseling data, is a big reason for referral for check-ins and individual therapy. So we continue to see, peer conflicts. They want more check-ins. A lot of the responses were just like, we want more availability. My counselor says that I can't meet with them. Their schedule's full. So they're asking for more. And then wanting them to maybe address more things head on, which isn't always the role of the counselor, but it was good feedback to see where can we connect with some administrators about some grade level presentations or things like that. Then we had our teacher survey. So with the exception of MIT, every teacher that responded was familiar with the counselors on campus. Have you ever interacted with your school's counselor before? Most of them had. Do you feel comfortable going to your school's counselor for support? Most of them said yes. So then we asked them to think about a student in their class who received individual or group therapy counseling and asked them to think if it was helpful. Some examples, I think it's 88% said yes. And so some examples of yes answers were that the student came back and was refocused and grounded. They gained confidence and communication skills, and that the counselors were able to meet the emotional needs that the teachers weren't able to in the middle of a lesson. Some of the maybe answers were that students need family therapy and students need long-term therapy. So the school-based therapy approach wasn't enough for some of their students. Did it help the students stay engaged in school? So some of the yes answers, yeah, they stayed more engaged because they were less anxious. Despite missing class, when they returned, they were engaged. Students were less distracted by peer conflicts when they were in class because they were addressed already, and that their attendance improved. And some examples of the sometimes or the no were that sometimes the students still had attendance issues or that their grades remained low. And their academic achievement isn't the direct goal of counseling. It is by helping a student improve mentally, we hope that their grades improve also, but we can't just tackle academic performance in counseling because that's not the profession and the training of a counselor. If your class received an SEL lesson from the counselor, were there benefits? About 94% said yes. They addressed topics of diversity and inclusivity. They taught the students how to learn to control their big feelings, and they focused on how to treat each other. The ones that said somewhat were not sure about lasting effectiveness, which we do see from data, it has better lasting effectiveness when implemented by a teacher, which is, somewhere we're moving towards. And that sometimes class management was difficult. And that also just depended on how managed the class was before the counselor stepped into the room. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your school's counselor or counseling services in general? So these are just kind of summaries from what the teachers responded. So a lot of teachers said that they were a vital part of the school community. There was sadness and frustration at positions being reduced. They made the campus feel safer, knowing that there's a professional on site should a crisis arise, and they're crucial to teachers being able to do their jobs. The next is the parent survey. The parent survey was new this year. We had never surveyed parents before. The survey did go out in English and Spanish, so we did get responses in both languages. So we asked if they were aware that counseling services were available. Most parents said yes. The schools that the parents said no, that's good indication of where we should be making some efforts. Unfortunately, the parent survey didn't go out to Orion, so it's not that no one knew. It's just that we didn't have parent responses from Orion. Do you know how to access these counseling services? So that's where we're like, all right, maybe we need to do a better job of educating parents. Not only are they here, but how can you ask for it? And then in response to this, we actually created a flyer with a QR code. And so it's in English and Spanish, and it's a flyer that tells you that the counselors are on campus. The QR code directly links you to every school site's referral form, just to make it easy for parents to be like, scanned it with my phone, filled out my information, and now my referral's made. So you don't have to go call the school or ask who the counselor is and ask to be sent the link. Everything is easily found on a flyer, and that was sent. I think Jorge sent it out to all the schools, and it was sent to all the administrators to put in their offices as well. We asked how likely they were to reach out to the school's counselor for support. Most schools were pretty high in terms of parent feeling like they could and felt comfortable initiating that contact. And the scores got higher when we said, if somebody from your school suggests it, would you accept? So maybe they didn't feel as comfortable initiating, but they felt more comfortable accepting it once it was offered. And then we were curious, what would make them feel more comfortable reaching out? So for example, getting more information about what counseling is and what the goals are, having a counselor that speaks my language and that I can easily communicate with, having a counselor that understands my culture. I already feel comfortable. Knowing if there's a cost associated with services, knowing more about the privacy rights and mental health records in schools, knowing what class my child would be missing if they're getting pulled out for a therapy session or something else. And so in order to combat kind of some of this feedback we got in that flyer that we created with a QR code, we stated that services are free and that we have a bilingual counselor at almost each of our schools, just to kind of reinforce that these services are available at no cost and that at most schools they can be attained in Spanish, since that is the second primary language for most of our parents. And then, sorry, for the something else, some of the examples were, I wouldn't force my child if they weren't comfortable, which we wouldn't want them to do either. Some parents don't like the idea that students can self-consent once they turn 12. And so this is maybe where we as a counseling team do some more education. Just because a student can self-consent, that's not the path we take. The path we take is we will only take a minor's consent if there's a clinical reason why we should see the child without consulting the parent. An example would be that there's abuse at home and the child needs a space to process it. And if we involve the parent, the abuse could worsen. A student is processing their gender or sexual identity, and they've disclosed that by telling the parent that they could lose their housing, be kicked out. So there has to be a clinical reason why we would accept a minor's consent. That is by FERPA law. If we were operating under HIPAA, like at a clinic, offsite, we wouldn't need that kind of clinical documentation and explanation as to why we're doing it. But here at a school, we do. So maybe that's just something that we need to be extra communicative with parents. We asked if services were not available at your school, would you be able to receive them anywhere else? And only about 50% said yes. The maybes might be that they've never asked, they're not sure. They might not even be sure where to ask or where to find the information. And then, did your child interact with a counselor on campus this year? And then the rest of the data that I'm going to go over is only for the parents that indicated yes, that their child had contact with a counselor. So we asked, do you know the name of the counselor your child met with? We need to do more work there on making sure that the parents have their name and their contact info, their phone number, their cell phone, their email, just to make sure that they're in constant communication so that they know, oh yeah, I need to talk with Ana Paula if I have a concern. Sometimes it's like, la güerita con el pelo chino, right? And so they can visually describe someone, but they forget the name. So maybe we just need to put our names out there a little bit more. How would you rate the communication with the counselor? At some schools, we have a little work to do. At some schools, we're doing great. Do you feel the services helped your child? For the most part, yeah, they felt like they helped. And then in what ways did they help? These were kind of the big themes from the survey results. So they helped manage the emotions at school and learning new strategies. They improved grades and school engagement, a safe place to express fears on campus. The parents felt like their students had better relationships with their friends. And the parents just felt nice knowing that there was a safe adult on campus. So what's coming down the pipeline? Lots of fun things. So our intern program is growing. So one of the benefits of having an intern program it is extremely more cost effective than contracting partners. An example is a full-time 40-hour a week One Life counselor is about $98,000 a year. A 220 a week, so the a 40-hour-a-week intern that we are contracting with directly is $30,000. So it's about a third of the cost. And with our contracted partners, we often get interns anyway who are still in grad school. So we're getting the similar level of experience, but we get to train them, we get to supervise them, and we pay them directly as opposed to going through a third party. So it's very exciting that 2 years ago we had one. This year we have 3. We have 2 at MIT and 1 at Hoover. And we have our existing district counselors providing the clinical supervision. So we also don't have to outsource that. We are making an effort to have more teacher facilitated SEL. So we have partnered with Wayfinder to do a pilot at 2 of our schools, Garfield and North Star. This is paid for in collaboration from the district and the Sequoia Healthcare District. And it's a combination of pre-made lessons and kind of like a video activity library. Previously, we were doing Changing Perspectives, which was funded for by the county, but we got a lot of feedback that it was really difficult for teachers to implement because it was almost too unstructured. They had like, here's all the books, here's all the videos, here's all the songs. And then the teachers had to piecemeal it together to create a lesson and then implement it. Whereas this one already has PowerPoints, they're already in English and Spanish. And if you, for whatever reason, wanted a presentation on bullying, just search for it, find it, PowerPoint, let's go. So this is meant to make teachers' lives a whole lot easier and more likely to be implemented on an ongoing basis. So far, the North Star staff has been trained, and they started implementing, I believe, in 5th grade a week or 2 ago, and we're working on scheduling Garfield staff training to get them going. And then for K-5, they get included a workbook. So they get to go through the workbook pages, they leave it at school, and that's kind of their SEL book. And then for 6 through 8, it comes at an additional cost. North Star did decide to pay for it this year, so we'll get to see if the 6-8 workbooks work out. And then we have the SB HIP grant, which is coming to an end. Historically, this has been used to fund behavior techs, the wellness center, and this year we're using it to pay for 0.5 of the Taft district counselor position to avoid that position going from full-time to part-time. Hiring an administrative assistant for the wellness center at MIT. The goal for this position is to kind of be a warm handoff. So a person comes in, a parent comes in to enroll their child, we find out that there's housing or food insecurity or something like that. This person can immediately kind of take that on and be like, all right, we're going to connect you to Antonio's team, or we're going to connect you to the case manager, or here's the resources for the food bank. Like, let's not wait until you have to show up at school and ask for these resources. Let's try to connect you and get you in the door a lot sooner. So we don't drop as many families and we get them connected a lot faster. We are also going to be providing virtual family therapy through an organization called Daybreak. So schools have already started referring their families. The services can be provided in English and Spanish, as well as in a couple other languages that Daybreak has available. We will be doing some virtual parent workshops, 3 in English and 3 in Spanish. Bertrini and I are working together to determine the topics and the dates. And then supplies as needed for the Wellness Center. This CYBHI grant is brand new. We just started implementing it. We are implementing cognitive behavior intervention for trauma in schools. So this is a trauma intervention that's evidence-based. This is a 2-year, $750,000 grant. We are able to hire 2 new counselors who are going to split their time at school. So 1 counselor is at Taft and Kennedy and 1 counselor is at Garfield and Hoover. We were able to train not just the 2 hires, but all of our existing clinical staff in CBITS. CBITS is for middle school, Bounce Back is the K-5 equivalent, so they were trained in both. And so we are now able to implement trauma groups that are very structured, they're 10 weeks long, it's a curriculum. The 2 new positions are exclusively running groups. They actually started this week at 3 out of the 4 sites. Most of the groups they're running are going to be in Spanish for a lot of our newcomers. And then I think only 1 out of the 5 groups we're planning will be in English. And then we're also able to train 40 staff each year for a total of 80 staff in trauma-informed skills for educators. It's a 6-hour training split up over 3 days. It's all virtual. The first training is actually tomorrow for staff. So we have anywhere from 10 to 12 staff from each of these 4 schools attending that are going to be trained. They have to attend all 3 trainings, And then with the help of Kristen and her team, we're going to do some learning collaboratives following it in the winter and springtime. So we didn't just send them to the training and great, hope you learned and hope that's okay, but we're actually going to do some follow-up. What was good? What's been easy to implement? What's been hard to implement? What additional supports might you need based on what you learned to like bring that to your classroom? So we're going to do that with Kristen in the spring. And then what I think there's a lot of questions about is the statewide multi-payer school linked fee schedule, which is a mouthful. So we are in cohort 2 for statewide implementation. We are the only district in our county in cohort 2, and nobody was in cohort 1. So we're leading the charge. And the reason for that is because within our county, we're the school that had the most established mental health services that made it able for us to be in cohort 2. The other districts didn't qualify, weren't able to apply for cohort 2. I believe the County Office of Ed just applied to be in cohort 4. And the deadline for cohort 3, I think, closes this week. So we have only had a couple of meetings so far. The people in cohort 1 who started in January of this year haven't started billing yet. So this is kind of a slower moving train than we initially thought. Running some rough numbers, assuming the number of providers that we have from our district team stay the same, we could see anywhere from $500,000 to $600,000 a year in reimbursements, which would be really fabulous. We would have to tweak kind of the services we provide to maybe like prioritize the billable services for certain staff members. So we would obviously figure that out as we go, but it would bring in a substantial amount of money because all of our team are associate or licensed staff. Interns currently, like students still in grad school, would not be able to bill under the current plan. Moving down in the future, beyond just our clinical team being able to bill, we could have One Life bill, and we get to recoup those reimbursements. So we would pay One Life upfront, like we've been doing for years with our contract, and then we would have them bill through our system. And then we could recoup some of that money to offset the cost. So there's a lot of promise down the line. We're just still getting information about how we're going to get there. There was a capacity grant brought down from the state that the County Office of Ed has. And so what they're doing with that money on behalf of all of the districts is working closely with Santa Clara County, who was in cohort 1, to really figure out what systems they put in place so that they can coach us in what we're doing so we can all be on the same page. And that way, if we have questions, they've probably already answered them and we have a little bit of a team in this process. And then I'm also working closely with a director over at the Health Plan of San Mateo, since they need to help us approve all our providers as Medi-Cal billing entities. So a lot of work being done in this area. So I'll probably have more updates in a couple months. And then lastly, Dr. Baker, Michelle Griffith, and I will be presenting at the California School Board Association Annual Conference. In early December, we will be presenting on student wellness, mental health, and community schools. So if you will be there, we will excitedly see you as we present. And we're just excited to show off all the hard work we've done and kind of keep leading the way. And I will let Kristen come on up for a second.
I feel like I'm crashing the party at this point. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Geiser. I'm a deputy director and a senior researcher at Stanford's John W. Gardner Center for Youth and Communities. It's really good to be back with you again. Anna Paula invited me just to say a couple words here at the end about some things we've been observing and appreciating about your work related to mental health over the last year, in particular the last few years as part of the collaborative. You've heard a lot tonight, which, by the way, that was a lot of data. Thank you for collecting that and making meaning of it with and for all of us. And I'm really struck, as I'm sure you are, by the breadth and depth of support being provided to your students and their families. This was just an idea a few years ago, right? And so to see it, to see the number of children and families being reached in all the different ways they're being reached is really powerful. And I think to echo and reinforce what Dr. Bott shared, it's really important for children to have early resources, early prevention, early intervention, and you're providing that across all of your schools and all of your grades. There's always more to do, but I think there's a lot to
sort of take a deep breath and acknowledge and appreciate that you've been doing. I also want to acknowledge that in addition to expanding and improving the services you're providing directly to children and their families, that you, and in part through the counseling program, in part through how it's connected to community schoolwork and broader district efforts to support students and families, you're also building out the conditions within and across your schools that make that work possible, that complement it, that sustain it, that leverage it. And so you're doing that right? And some of the things we've observed over the last few years are things like how the counseling program is supporting principals and assistant principals and vice principals, bringing them up, in their own words, to attend to more of their instructional leadership role. They're building teacher capacity to support student mental health in their classrooms. They're strengthening the contributions of partners like all those part-time counselors so they can be matched with the right students so their support can be really tailored and appropriate with the children they're meeting with. And then there's all the data they're collecting and providing and helping to understand impact and need and what might need more funding and what might need more support. So this slide, I hope, looks familiar. This is a slide that we created together very early in our conversations about the Mental Health Collaborative, because it was what we all hoped to do together. And it was to build district capacity to support individuals, students, and their families. But it was also the hope and the vision was to create improved capacity in schools and improved capacity at the district level in terms of systems, in terms of things that would be true across schools and across communities. And so I think it's important tonight too to acknowledge that progress is being made in all of those places. And at the Gardner Center, we think about that as a really important and promising indication that there are some systems that are changing. It's not just an attachment of services and additional provision of collections of services, but you're really creating a culture and processes and systems that support this. And we've been really grateful to be part of that. We're also really looking forward to being part of it in the year ahead. And one of the things I want to add to the year ahead conversation, and Anna Paula alluded to it earlier, is that the funding from Stanford's Office of Community Engagement that has supported all of this partnership work to date, specifically related to mental health, is sunsetting next summer. That would be the end of 5 years of commitment from them, which has been amazing. So one of the things we get to do together this year is think about what would it look like to continue the work? What might we want to do together? And then how might we find some funding for that together? So we are looking forward to doing that with you, and we'll figure it out. We have some time, but I did want to plant that seed. So to be continued, and thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that was an excellent presentation with a lot of data. Thank you to all of the presenters. I'm assuming that's the end, right? Okay. So I was gonna open up to the board for questions, comments. Would somebody like to start? I don't like calling on people, so you can.
Yeah. So again, thank you for the presentation. Definitely a lot of information. I'm really appreciative and grateful for the partnership, for everyone's help, including, obviously our superintendent for believing in all of our students and partnering with Stanford, obviously to our wonderful Redwood City employees, as well as One Life and Star Vista and everyone else that is part of this. We sure are making a difference. And I hope, even just looking at the data, one of the things that really I was thrilled when I was reading the agenda was the parent referrals, because a lot of the times for parents is like a taboo, right? Where no, again, somebody mentioned, I think it was Dr. Bond, it's kind of a hard thing to sometimes even believe that this is happening to your own child. Definitely, I know the needle is moving. I always say this, as long as it's moving, we're in the right direction. Definitely a lot of information. I hope to see the numbers, increase on the check-ins, because then obviously they feel comfortable, whether it's the students, the parents, obviously the teachers. Thank you to all the teachers for Obviously, I know it helps them too, but we appreciate the referrals. And I did write some notes because I don't want to forget. Let's see. And some of those kind of questions might have been answered, but I had on slide 11, which I didn't see the numbers here, but on the presentation, peer relationships seem to be that item the most check-ins. Are these mainly middle schools? And again, that question could have been answered, but or was that K-5? And I'm not sure if that was answered, but
We didn't, but it's all schools.
okay.
Yeah, it's across all grade levels, across all 12 schools.
Okay.
It was in the top 3 for every school.
And then this kind of was a random question, was how we thought or provide teachers with activities they can use or do in class so that perhaps they can help their students instead of sending them to the clinicians or the staff. And then on slide 14, do we know why 3rd grade has the most group therapy? Was that, or, you know, I guess I was just curious. Do you want to answer the question
Yes.
before we move on to? Okay.
So for the first one, in terms of can the counselors give the teachers things to do in the classroom? Actually, this year, and I'm going to highlight Diane for a second, right behind me, she is putting together like PowerPoints full of books and songs and activities for teachers to implement in the classroom based on different categories and topics. So if a teacher wants a resource or wants to pull from something, they don't have to go research it. The counselor has already put it together for them. So this year, we're starting to move away from counselor-led SEL and more teacher-focused. So that's one of the things we're doing to try to give teachers the tool so they don't have to go find it on their own. And then the second question was about 3rd grade group. We are going to look at it, talk with the counselors about it. Honestly, 1st through 4th is pretty common in terms of being the highest. We see different peaks in different grade levels. I think 2 years ago, the highest group was 1st grade. And so granted, last year they would have been 2nd graders, but sometimes things just spike. Yeah.
And then I guess just for clarification, the surveys that went out, was that district-wide or was that, okay, not just for like those kids that were getting surveyed?
No, so that went to everyone. So the student one went to everyone. So regardless of whether you met with a counselor or not, they filled it out. Same with teachers and same with parents.
And then just one last comment when Dr. Bott mentioned that psychiatrists are like unicorns. Unicorns are magical. So I think your magic is working with our students. So I really appreciate it. And of course, you know, the referrals that you guys get. So definitely happy to hear that, you know, that one crisis you guys were able to help the student within a day or a week. I forget what you said, versus, you know, waiting the 3 or the 6 months that they have to wait for. So really, really appreciate what everyone's doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ana Paula, for the presentation. And of course, Marianne, Diane, Apurva, Kristen, thank you for being here tonight and presenting. First, the Stanford collaboration. I can't believe that 5 years is coming to the end for that, the funding that's come through. I know the collaboration is going to continue because there's some great relationships that have been built here. But I do look forward to finding ways to continue to fund this program. I think that's an important thing for us to continue to offer here. We see the evidence from, you know, the number of check-ins, the impact that we get from the survey data, and even looking at the attendance data, you're starting to see the positive stuff there. The one thing I wanted to ask before I jumped into a couple of the other questions, can you just sort of paint the picture of like, what is a check-in? What does individual session look like? What does group therapy look like?
I would love to.
Really briefly, yeah.
So individual and group therapy, we usually receive referrals through Screen Team, right? So this is a student who's maybe been struggling for a while, or a student that maybe already had a check-in. We're like, oh, this is not going to get solved in like a one-time 20-minute interaction, right? There's something deeper that's was caused for you to get referred to me today. So that's kind of what leads to an individual or group therapy referral. A check-in is usually happens when a staff member or a student themselves is like really sad, right? Or the teacher sees like, like Mike's had his head down all day, and that's not usually how he shows up to school. Like, could you check in with him, just make sure everything's okay? So that's usually how teacher check-ins happen. And again, we aim for them to be about 20 minutes. So we're trying to get the average time down, so it's less time out of the classroom. But it's typically a one-time interaction, just something's happening, they want to check in, they kind of just want to offload, just have a place to like not hold it in anymore so they can go back to class. Versus individual or group, as we're working on the same topic week after week to address it, because it's not just a one-time conversation. Yeah.
Got it. And in the survey results, I think it was, I think it was like half the families weren't sure if they were able to find, pay for medical, or counseling outside of the school. And, students are our highest, or I guess the students were saying in their survey that they wished they had more hours that they could get to it. Sometimes their counselors were busy. Are we prioritizing the students that are most dependent on school-based services? Like, is there ways that we're doing that? How are we addressing the needs of the students where they really are school dependent, and the school-based services are probably the best opportunity?
One of the ways we're doing it is the schools that have the most counseling are typically the schools that parents don't have that access. So some of the schools that have higher socioeconomic status, or where parents have employer-sponsored health insurance, for example, are schools that this year have maybe less counseling than some of the other schools. So we've addressed it by more equitably assigning the amount of counseling at schools. And then while at school, we do take that into account, especially once we start having wait lists. If we receive a referral for a student and we talk to the parent, we'll ask them, can you access the service through your insurance? If they say yes, then we ask them to head that way so we don't keep them on the wait list, and maybe we bump somebody else up that wouldn't have that opportunity. Yeah.
Cool, that's great. And then this is probably the news algorithms out there, but I feel like I'm hearing more and more about research that's coming around, particularly post-pandemic, about how the effective, mental health crisis that came out of the pandemic, but also the effectiveness of mental health counseling, and really the effectiveness of school-based mental health counseling as a part there. I know I listened to one podcast that talked about some report. Like, I don't really know if that's the most authoritative source. You had mentioned that maybe you were going to work with Kristen for some of that research. There must be more evidence coming out and research coming out showing the effectiveness, and particularly of school-based mental health programs, not just of mental health counseling in general.
Correct. So that's something that's coming out much faster than it has in the past. One of the big benefits of school-based counseling, I think Dr. Bott touched on it, is that schools are sometimes a lot more approachable, right? You know the people that work at your school. You walk into a clinic and where do I go? I checked in, I speak Spanish. They asked me for my card, my health insurance card in English, and now I'm flustered and I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe. I don't feel welcomed. So just the fact that it's in a school is beneficial. A lot of our parents have off working hours, right? So the fact that they don't have to go up in the middle of the day during their lunch break, pick up their child, take them to their appointment, bring them back. We now also have counseling during the after-school program paid for by the extended learning program. So if we're not able to see them during the day, sometimes we can see them in the after-school program. So there's a lot of just benefits that we've seen to having it, but we will get you that data.
Yeah, and I mean, we know from the community school model how important it is to bring the partnerships to the school. This is just in my mind, is an extension of that. It just seems like we should be able to see, like, yes, there is also outside evidence that that's the case there. This was awesome. I really appreciate the report. Lots of effort has gone into not just the program and offering it, but also just pulling together all the data in the presentation tonight. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation, for everybody who delivered pieces of it. Really appreciated it. There is a lot there. There's a lot I could talk about, but I'll try not to repeat too much what my colleagues already said. Kristen, thank you so much for all that you've done. Dr. Bott, we really appreciate the partnership from Stanford. It's been truly amazing, and I think it's enabled us to get to where we are today. Along, of course, with Ana Paula's leadership and other leadership in our district, and then all of our own counselors and clinicians and all of that. I mean, it is amazing to think about it, as you brought up, Kristen, just the depth and the breadth of all the different services that we're providing at school. And if you think about it, you know, our students are at school Monday through Friday, a good part of the year. They're long days. Many of them stay for after school programs or they're hustling about after. Parents are busy, we know. So when we talk about providing school-based services, a lot of those students who really need early intervention, they're not going to be getting it if we're not providing it at schools. We know that, right? Or it's going to, next thing you know, it's going to be a crisis. They're going to wind up in the emergency room, or they're really acting out in school and they're not, you know, they're not getting to where they need to be. So one of the things I just love about what we've been doing is, in addition to everything we talked about here tonight, how it really, I know you're always having conversations with, you know, our community schools. We've got an MTSS program that's very much aligned with the Tier 1 and classroom management. I love the idea that we're moving to teachers doing more of the SEL, because I think that'll help them just in terms of doing the lessons and then really hopefully implementing some of that within their classroom as part of their overall classroom management and how they work with students. Sounds like I think it was the Wayfair. That sounds real. And we got to make it easy, right? Because our teachers are tasked with so much, so we can't expect them to start pulling things together as one more assignment. So I love the idea of these sort of, you know, the PowerPoints are ready to go and they can pull something on bullying or whatever the conversation might be in the classroom that's needed. Just love that. And I think, you know, one of the biggest struggles for us will be financing, given that, you know, some of the Stanford money will be ending, but we want to keep some of the services going. So we're going to have to figure out a way there. We know that in the next few months, we're going to be talking about some of the budget right sizing that we need to do in our district because of the COVID dollars going away. So I appreciate the work on the Medi-Cal. I think it's Medi-Cal, right? Reimbursements, that's going to be really, really important. And if we can bring in $500,000 to $600,000 plus maybe a little bit more with One Life, I mean, that's 5 individuals, right? Or, you know, 4.5, whatever it might be. It's significant. So I think that we need to think about, you know, and I welcome Stanford's assistance on this revenue generation because we don't want to have to just do cuts. If we just do cuts, then, you know, unfortunately, this is going to be one of the areas we're going to have to look at because it was an extra area we brought in with COVID dollars. And so something at the end of the day has to give. And I'm hoping that we can keep this program intact with some of the adjustments that you're talking about, you know, trying to do things more efficiently, effectively. And then anyway, so I just encourage all of us in the next several months through this year to really look for those revenue opportunities to assist us. And yeah, Dr. Bott, I did want to say the unicorn. I love that. And 23,000 hours of clinician hours. I mean, that's just amazing. And to have that experience and talent coming to us and helping us in our district is just amazing. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Oh, of course. You know, Dr. Josie, I mean, he was there from day one in those meetings. I was there as well, and Dr. Baker was, and Janet. So it's really exciting to see where this went. I remember at first we were talking about some other things, and then somebody started talking about mental health, and then it took off from there. And anyway, it's been an amazing partnership.
If I could just add, it's not just Medi-Cal that we can ask for reimbursement. It's also other managed care plans like Blue Shield and Kaiser.
Right.
The only ones we can't reimburse are high deductible health plans. And then one other example, but we should be able to reimburse most health plans for students at our schools.
That is awesome. That's great.
Most of my comments have been said. I don't want to keep you here longer. You've all had long days, but I have a couple of questions. I was curious, with having our own district clinicians plus One Life and Star Vista, how is it decided where a student will receive the services once they're referred?
So at the schools where we have a full-time district clinician, they typically will take on the heavier cases, whether that's the crisis, slightly more long-term, maybe more severe, and we leave kind of the more kind of stable students, I guess, for our contracted partners, mostly because they're not there every day. And so we want our district counselors who are there every day to kind of see those more frequent flyers, the kids who keep popping up in crisis, because they can check in more regularly and keep building that rapport and that relationship. At the schools where we have the part-time district counselors, that's kind of what we're figuring out this year. Our One Life partners have only been on site for a month. I think this is their 4th week. And so we're kind of figuring out how the referrals get shared because we don't have one person there every day. So we have to figure out how to prioritize that still.
And then let's see, there was the slide that talked about when they are done with their therapy services, and that one of the bars talked about because the school year ended. Are those students automatically picked up again in the fall when they come back, or?
They automatically get a check-in and to kind of reevaluate our services still needed. We never want to assume that a student still needs counseling and have them take the spot of somebody who maybe needs it, but maybe over the summer, whatever family situation was happening got resolved. Or maybe they were really stressed out about the end of the school year and that's why they were in counseling. And now that maybe they have a new teacher and new kids in their class. And so those peer relationships kind of fix themselves. So we do check in with those students, but we don't guarantee it because we don't know that the level of need is still going to be there 3 months later.
Sure. Just they're not getting lost in the shuffle of
the
new school year. Good. And then just going back to the billable services that Elisa, you touched on, but I just want to repeat that the reason we're in cohort 2 and we're the only district in the entire county that's able to do this is because of Dr. Baker's vision and foresight pre-pandemic to bring this mental health piece into our district. We wouldn't be this well established and be able to access it without your work on that. So thank you. And then your vision to use those COVID dollars to really
bring it forward.
Yeah, make it happen. So thank you for that.
Anapala, thank you so much. Dr. Bott, thank you so much for being here, and Kristen. I know we're talking about reductions and so forth, and there was a panel. I served on a panel today for the Stanford Collaborative for the Graduate School of Education. And the rationale for, when they ask you to do this is so it opens up doors to other possibilities. So Amy was there with me today because she was also presenting. So there is a list of I called them the heavy hitters that were in the audience that really fund. So I have that list and we should probably all look at it. I met with a couple of the people that were there that were really intrigued. We were talking about LTELs, but they were really intrigued when Dean Schwartz, when you do when you're going to be in a panel and you're going to present, you have to, for Dean Schwartz, you have to give your presentation ahead of time. He kind of, grades you on it. It's like, oh my God, I'm back in graduate school again. but anyway, I wanted to talk, definitely about this partnership we have. He says, yes, you can, but it's going to be a little thorn that comes out from a rose because I really want you to talk about LTELs. But I said, LTELs are really receiving some of these services. So he let me,
for the audience, LTEL is long-term English
learners. And so he let me bring it in, not at a great force like the rest of the presentation, but there were some people there that were quite interested in the mental health piece that was a collaborative with Stanford, Dr. Josie, Dr. Bott, Kristen, Amy, Gernstein, the Gardner Center. And so we may get something out of that. I have a list. Amy also has a list, Kristen. And she said we should also talk to Phil. But thank you so much for the presentation. It was great. The data was wonderful. And Dr. Bott, you're amazing when you come to these meetings and you give us all this information and share what is happening. And your fellows, thank them so much for us. I really appreciate it. Kristen, as always, you're always welcome. Thanks.
Thank you for being with us. We know you've had a long day.
Long day.
You're welcome to stay and sit through the rest of our meeting, but we'll understand if you go.
We get it.
Okay, so we are on 7.1, discussion of year-end assessment results for the 23-24 school year.
Okay, tonight we have Jenny Tran, who will be presenting our CAST, ELA, and math performance data from 2023-2024.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. And today I'll be sharing our year-end assessment data for 23-24 spring assessment. This presentation will show you the aspect performance for both English and math for students in grade 3 to 8 throughout all the historical years that we have data on, also highlighting the result by student group and including cohort performance data. So this is a brief overview of the demographic of the student who participate in the ELA assessment in spring 2024. We achieved an impressive participation rate of 99%, total of more than 4,000 students tested. And you can also see the breakdown for our student group, especially in English learners and disability and student with socioeconomic disadvantage status. On the right hand, we'll have a summary of the breakdown by ethnicity groups, just so that you have an idea of how large of the group when we are looking at the data. Okay, next slide. This graph shows you the performance for EOA with showing you the percentage above the benchmark and below the benchmark. Overall, you can see at least 40% of our students at each grade level meet and exceed the standard, while more than 50% did not meet or exceed the standard, and it's across all the grade levels. Next slide. This graph shows you the achievement gaps among our district average compared to other student groups. The district average is 45%, indicated by the dotted line in the middle of the graph. The data here show you a significant achievement gap among all student groups, especially for the three focus group, student with disability, English learner, and also long-term English learner, who are performing very below our district average. Next slide. From this graph, you can see since the pandemic, the percentage of students meeting or exceeded standard had dropped significantly to 45% and has remained steady. It's highlighting the ongoing challenge in our district in improving the student reading proficiency. Next slide. This chart presents the cohort data that illustrate how each grade level is performing this year compared to how they did in ELA in previous 2 years. So for example, if you look in the current 8th grader, they're doing how they're doing in the dark green, 2024, how did they do in 2023, and how did they do in the 2022 in the lighted green shade. Overall, we can see our 5th and 7th graders demonstrate consistent growth in percent of students achieving meet or exceeded standard over time. The 6th graders, however, in 2023-24, they show significant decline in their performance. Next slide. This chart shows you the percentage student with disability versus their peers who are not reported with any disability, and how their percent of meet and exceeded standard for the AOA compared to the year. Compared to the district, which is in the red line, the student with disability has always been historically until now performing below the average, and the gap is pretty wide. Along just the last year, 2023-24, the gap kind of widened a little bit with the drop in the percent of students who are on above standard level. Next slide. This year, the performance of students who, this chart represents the students who are identifying as having economically disadvantaged status compared to their peers who are not, and then compared to the district. We can see here is a mirroring of the trend that we see in students with disability, and the gap is also widening due to the result that came out for 23-24 school year. This chart is a little busy, but I want to drive your focus in the two student group here. So this chart shows you how the student with different language proficiency status is doing in ELA throughout the years. The two focus group we want to look at are the English learner in blue, which is at the bottom of the chart, and the multilingual student, which is the gray line at the top of the chart. These two groups have showed us that they have declining in their performance throughout the past 3 years, and the gap between the district and the English learners are widening, and the gap between the district and the multilingual is widening, but because they are declining in their performance, so they kind of get close to the district average. Okay, that's what I have for the EOA assessment. Next is the math component of the SBAC test. At the participation rate of also 99%, we tested more than 4,000 students with the similar makeup of the student group for EOA assessment. Next slide. This chart also show you that Redwood City students have generally performed at a lower level in math compared to reading. Additionally, as students progress to a higher grade level, you can say a greater number fall below the standard benchmark. This kind of indicate an increasing challenge in math proficiency also. Next slide. This illustrates the achievement gap between student groups. So the district average is 37%, indicated by the dotted line in the middle. And also we see again the same three focus group who are having a very wide gap compared to other student groups, and the district average are students with disability, English learner, and long-term English learner. Next slide. In line with the EL result that we saw earlier, our math performance has also remained stagnant and significantly below the pre-pandemic levels. Next. So this chart, similar to ELA, represent the cohort data, how each grade level is doing compared to previous year where they took the tests. From this chart, we can see our 4th, 5th, and 6th grader experience significant drop in percent of student meet or exceeding standard. Meanwhile, our 7th and 8th graders show little to no improvement in the percentage of meeting standard. Next line. This chart shows the student group with disability also compared to non-disability students. Similar trend that we observe in ELA, students with disability performance have declined over the past year, resulting in a wider gap compared to their non-student with disability peers. Next slide. Also, very similar trend we see in ELA, we see it in math. Students who are not in economic disadvantage are performing significantly well above the district average, while students with economic disadvantage status are performing below and not improving. Next slide. So this graph, you can see again, the two focus group are English learner, blue one, and student with multilingual are the gray ones. They have seen no improvement for the past 3 years, or with multilingual, they show decline in their performance for the past 3 years. So I think that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Jenny. Anybody want to start with comments or questions?
Sure. I had a real clarifying question on the cohort slide. I might have misunderstood it when I was looking at it before, but when we're looking at the, in either of the cohort ones, but if we're looking at the current 6th grade, the 2023 bar, the 2022 bar, is that the 6th grade scores from those years, or is it those students that were currently in 6th grade, their score from 5th grade and 4th grade? It's that. Oh, so that's
that one. So the 6th grader in 2024 spring, 30% of them are on level. that same sixth grader in 2022, when they took the test, 35% of them were on level. And then the same group grader, when they were in fourth grade in 2022, they took the test and they were 37% on above standard.
Okay, well, that's a really powerful slide to see. It's very, very enlightening. And so thank you, Jenny, for putting that together. It's clear that we were seeing growth prior to the pandemic. Even just looking at the dipstick measure of whether that grade was meeting the standards without looking at individual growth. And it's clear from this cohort slide that that's not that hasn't continued since the pandemic. And we're about 3 years out now. And so it's clearly, it's time to get back on that growth trajectory that we were seeing prior to the pandemic, and it's got to be done. Like, we still want to do it in a way where safe and supportive environment, inspirational, rigorous, and a joyful, inclusive environment for all learners. So I was wondering, either Anna or John, you've talked about it a little bit, like in your last board report, but what are we doing differently this year to sort of help get back on the growth trajectory?
So one of the things that we're doing differently, and I had explained a bit about this at one time, and especially in our individual meetings, was the educational rounds that we're doing. And so what we're doing with those rounds, and as I explained to you, cabinet members, we are all assigned to schools for a period of time. It's kind of cyclical for the year. So we're assigned right now to 3, and then I think in October 28th, that ends with those 3, and we move on to another 3. And whoever has my 3, it's another group of cabinet members that comes in. So the plan behind this is to, number one, really look at the data and make sure that the principals understand the data, number one. Number two is for them to meet with their teachers at grade level for the data and to understand where are the missing pieces, where do we need improvement. And then 3, this next week on Monday, the principals have been trained in professional learning communities, and this next week on Monday, they'll be working with their staff on how that's going to be operated through at their school sites per grade level, per individual teachers at times, if individual teachers need to be spoken to in regard to their data and what next steps can occur. So there are also action plans that each principal does have that we meet with them to review these action plans and what their next steps are. What you will see coming forward the next piece is benchmark. All of that's been done for the fall. So we're going to see where the kids were when they left us in the spring, where they are now in the fall. They all are working now on meeting the needs of those students who have not been improving. So that's either in small group instruction. There are also reading specialists that are at the school site. Our MTSS people are working on tier 1 instruction with our classroom teachers. So we are taking all that into play when we look at their action plans to see if there's improvement. We'll get a dip. We don't have a dipstick yet because we only have from the spring to the fall. And so and when's the next one?
March. So this year we moved from 3 to 2 for iReady. So our next one will be the March.
So we'll see something and see what that looks like in March. The other piece that we've been talking about with some of our principals is there are some CASP like get ready tasks that you can do with your classrooms. We need to go back to doing some of that. We did that previously. We did that before, and we need to start doing that again. So it's just like if you're going to take the GRE, you can get, you can go to classes that prepare you, or there are different books. I think we need to do the same thing with our kids, especially our English learners, in that sense, because when you look at, especially you get into the word problems, you get into the reading of passages where you have to comprehend and so forth, you need a little heads up on what's there.
Yeah, and I hate over indexing on a test, right? Because there's so many other ways. That's what we get. Exactly. I know.
And that's what people see.
That is what people see. I was wondering though, like what are you using to measure interim success between the tests? You know, are they really thriving in there? And is that something that's showing up in the data as well, or can be seen in the data?
So one of the things that we're really moving forward to, just like in the past when we used to do PLCs, is really trying to get everyone onto the same page, which we weren't. Honestly, we weren't. Teachers were really trying to make sure they're using our curriculum standards, right? Looking for standard-based curriculum, not only that, but assessing the standards through their own curriculum, because many of our curriculum have assessments in there, and we want them to start using those formative assessments and meet in collaborative teams to really start looking at how to move the students. So it's one of those things that's going to take a couple of years because we're starting back into the PLCs. And this year we have four specific days for PLC work to be able to lead those with our principals, leading them and really looking at the data. So really trying to get those formative assessments back into play. Like we're going to be looking at writing again. So trying the teams to really come back in and creating and getting back on the same page. So like math, we have for K-5, we have certain benchmarks that we've said, you guys, everyone has to have this test done by this date within a time frame so that we can then use that assessment, and then they're planning for the next unit. So we're really trying to put those benchmarks into place. This year we have definitely put all our assessments out and very timely, and we've let principals know everyone needs to have the assessment done by this day, and you have to have it ready so that when they come to PLC, that the work is being done. So there's a lot more alignment this year that we've put into play, not only curriculum, but looking at assessments too, that we hadn't done that in the past.
Great. And so when does the board get to hear a report on progress? How things are going?
We'll definitely do the report on the rounds, and then I guess there's going to be a report on where we are with benchmark right now from fall to spring. So that's done. So that's the next report that you're going to get. That's the next one. The other piece I think that's really important to really materialize is that our principals are getting more into the classrooms right now, which is great, and seeing what is occurring. I was up at Roosevelt today, and was one of the teachers' classrooms. She's amazing. So we need to have. I was talking to Anna. We need to have some other teachers come into that classroom. And so it's like, and that was a combination classroom with 30 kids in it, and she was amazing. I was very pleased to see that. The other piece is the coaching model from TCM that's coming in. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that. That was another amazing piece to see today that I saw in the 4th grade class, that this contracted services that we have contracted with and how she was demonstrating how to work with children.
So we've contracted this year because we have our CSI schools and our ATSI schools. Knowing that our long-term English learners and our English learners are not working up to par. So we've contracted with TCM, which is Teacher Created Materials, which is our language power supplemental ELD. And so they have professors who also are coming in and doing demonstrations with our staff. So at each site, we're working with 3rd through 5th grade and 6th to 8 at these sites. And so what happens this week and last week, we've had our demonstrations. So they come in, they actually teach a lesson, they debrief what they, do a prelude to what's going to happen and talk about why they're doing what they're doing with the teachers, really about academic discourse, making sure children, our students, are talking, how to get them engaged in the reading and chunking. So they're giving them strategies. And so the coaches that are at each of our sites that we have designated are really now their next level is they saw the demonstration, they had the debrief. So this next month is having the teachers plan with those strategies in mind so that they're also making sure we're providing these the same as the model that was provided for us, the discourse, opportunities to talk and engage the students in a different way. So we are doing that for our CSI schools. They have 5 visits. For our ATSI schools, we have 3. So the reason is CSI is because we have to provide more resources for those schools. But we have some excellent professors that are college professors from down in LA that are flying up and doing these demonstrations with our teachers. And so it's been great to see. And then we're hopefully starting to plan our next steps with the teachers. Actually, today I was observing, I was at Hoover and one of our coaches was already, planning with some of the teachers. So it was great to see that what we're doing, and then they're taking it to the next level. So it's great.
I just wanted to add a couple of other items of intentionality. I do think the principals were very strategic in organizing their teacher common planning time to really dive into the lessons that are common, any shared student experiences, and in doing so, also with that time to look at the data and be strategic every single week or every other week, depending on their schedule. I also think the time during their staff meeting was really scrutinized more so ever. And in all fairness, coming out now, we are fully out. We have a lot of our mental health supports, as you know, and the behavioral pieces have calmed a little. There's a little dip here, so that academic piece could rise more to the forefront. And getting back into the strategic discussions about what happens after we look at that data is very targeted and intentional. So it's nice to see those mind shift changes after coming out of such a crisis to really get back into a more narrowed focus and having the luxury to be able to do that now. So just wanted to add to that.
And I think the principals really are in a moment right now where they realize that, yeah, we're out of COVID. We need to move forward. We did it before. We can do it again. But it's looking at that data and looking at that data more so than what we did in the past, because where we are right now, because if you look at that trajectory that was prior to COVID, it was going, it was doing well. And we need to get back to looking at the data, creating the next steps, and monitoring what's going on in the classroom. Is it working? Is it not working? If it's not, how are we going to shift? The other piece that was really eye-opening at some of our school sites, especially the ones that I've been at now for what? Has it been 4 weeks? 4 weeks is to, well, I was talking to the principal today and she was talking how she had this meeting and so forth, and this is what she set up. And she said, I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but I went into the classroom and it was, I mean, it's happening. So, and so it's good that they're having that time and energy with their teachers. They do have the guest teachers at the school sites, which is great because it can release teachers from the classroom to come meet with them, not only individually, but at a grade level. If you use your guest teacher, you use PE plus, you have art, or you have music, and you make sure that you schedule it in a fashion where you can meet together with them, and this is what we're doing. And we have to do this as a grade level, and it has to be done to fidelity. That's the other piece.
Yeah, no, these sound great. And I also want to thank you for all the time that you all are putting into it, being out on the site every day. And the principals I know are putting in, I mean, a shift is hard, right? Any kind of shift is going to take time and effort. So I appreciate what everyone's doing. There's also like only a fixed number of minutes in a school day. So I'm wondering, like, as we shift towards academics, are we going to lose on something else? There's only so many minutes in the day. Are you worried about losing anything as we emphasize more on academics?
There is, and we talk about the extras, the enrichment piece. Can you schedule them differently? Maybe you don't do them all in 1 week. Maybe you rotate them, because there's, like you said, there's only so much time in a day. And then what's really been helpful too is the extended learning program takes on a piece to really work with some of these kids too, which is really good, even though sometimes I hear from these kids don't want to do it, but we're going to do it. We're going to have fun and we're going to move forward. And so that's another time. But for all the extras, and we call them the specials, or you call them enrichments, you can't do them. If you have garden, and then you have art, and then you have music, then you have STEAM, you can't do them all in 1 week. So rotate them throughout the month. Then it'll give you some, but to do them every week and then you have to do the academics, there's not enough time. And plus there's the 30-minute ELD designated each day. We need that. It has to happen. And we've got language power. Remember, we didn't have the curriculum. We've got the curriculum now. We need to use it to fidelity.
So I just to add on to that, I think there's been a lot of movement this year in terms of our expectations. I think there's some pretty clear expectations of where we're going and moving. And I think that's been a change. And it's a change for teachers, right? So they're also adapting to everything, but I think principals are pretty clear on where we're going. And I think, you know, we need to give them time because this is a big change, a mindset for some of our staff. And just going back to what we did before was the good practices of the PLCs. We were doing all that before the pandemic. We were using analysis. And so we're just trying to go back to those practices again.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, as we've said a couple of times already, we saw the growth trajectory that was happening before, even on, I mean, I think just looking at met standard or exceed standards is really not a great measurement. It'd be much better if we were actually looking at like growth profiles of students and how they're doing, you know, what their expected growth is within there. But even just looking at that, we could see a trajectory that was happening pre-pandemic, and it's awesome to see the work that you're putting in and the changes. I acknowledge that they're hard, so I appreciate everyone working on it. And we'll see how it goes for this year. I'm looking forward to seeing the reports. You know, and as our school reports start kicking in, maybe we'll hear some of these things surfacing through that as well. Yeah. So thanks.
Elisa or Cecilia, do you want to?
Yeah, just thank you, Mike, for all your comments and getting these guys to talk about everything that's going on. I'm really looking forward to the next few years and just seeing the improvements that I know that we'll have. And Jenny, I wanted to say thank you very much for these slides. I feel like this batch, I know we've given a lot of feedback over time, what will be helpful. And what I appreciate with the slides that you put together is it really helps us identify particularly the groups of students that need more of our work, where we have those opportunity gaps. And so where we know we need to do more. And at the end of the day, it's about the teacher in the classroom and the 25 to 32 kids they have. You know, more if it's middle school, they're kind of rotating through, but for those contained classrooms, and really coming up with, you know, individualized plans for each of these kids and really digging into the data like you're doing and bringing in all these amazing practices that we have and the support systems that we heard about some of them today, and really trying to get movement on these students because we know we have a lot of work to do. I know I was sort of doing back of the envelope calculations, like what if the pandemic years hadn't happened and the trajectory we had, and we would have so many students achieving, right? And so we know we need to get back there. But what's really telling about the data, the big data that we see tonight, because we're not looking at the individual data or the formative assessments on what the teachers are really teaching in the classroom, is that, you know, some of our students, particularly those that have a higher economic status, they're seeing growth. I mean, they're still delayed from the pandemic years, right? But some of our other students are not. And so we know that they need more supports. And so I know that you all know that, the educators here in the room. And so, you know, we just need to get more movement. And I know you're doing the work. So anyway, I will be following this for the next many years to see all the growth that'll happen and applaud you. So thank you. And I do want to say, Jenny, thank you very much, like I said, and just thanks to, you know, the principals, the vice principals, the teachers, the instructional assistants, all of you at the senior level with the cabinet. Thank you so much, because I really think it's going to make a difference for students.
I don't want to repeat again what everyone had said. It is sad to see that some obviously groups are not performing so well. But again, we're moving in a way that we're being hopeful, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then hopefully too, with the mental health, some of those kids would perform better too. Definitely, I guess another piece that we would probably have to do as a district is perhaps more parent guidance. I know on our one-on-one with Dr. Baker, I was telling him about some of our English learner parents. how do we communicate with them? Do we make more phone calls rather than getting emails? Some of them, and the reason why I'm saying this, I was at a DLAC meeting and some of the parents had some questions. And so how do we know that we're actually getting to all those parents? Because if those are the kids that are struggling, then we also need to target their, I know we're here for the students, but then the students need their parent support. And so how can the parents support their student? We kind of have to provide them the tools. So it starts with the teachers too. And I also want to thank, obviously, they do all the hard work, following the curriculum and, being with the students. Now that parent-teacher conferences are coming, can we communicate better with the parents? Maybe some parents, and I know we've given them a lot of information, like what questions to ask, but do they remember? It's almost like when you go to the doctor and you forget to tell them something else hurts and then you leave and I'm like, oh, wait till next year. So anyway, I do want to say, and just like, I don't want to repeat, but of course, thanks to everyone for everything that we are doing. Obviously, we need to do better. And we're hoping, just like you guys are looking and the principals are being involved, that with time, that only time would tell, and that, we continue to be hopeful and moving in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, for all the data. It's so hard to look at it and see what the pandemic did to not just our students, but students everywhere. And we just got to get back on track. I do have one question. There's one piece of data that just baffles me. And I don't know if anybody here can give me an answer to it, but why did the multilingual students take such a dive?
Yeah.
Is there any reason?
I have no idea. Matter of fact, we were talking at Stanford today. There was a comment that was made, regarding multilingual students and how well they do. And there was this research project, which we were a part of it, and how well our kids were doing. And one of the guests that was in the audience made a comment about, well, what about now, since COVID happened and we've been hearing other things, and what Professor Padilla said, yes, this is a time when we all have to realize, that even though they are multilingual learners, we don't know how the COVID really, how that internalized, and being on screens and instead of being in the classroom, and what that did to kids. So he says there is some type of study out of Texas right now that's looking into that, because it's not only California, it's Texas, where Texas has a huge multilingual program. I mean, they pay school districts to have multilingual programs in your schools. And if you do that, state gives you additional dollars above what you normally would get. So they're really concerned also, but there was no real answer that came from it, only that he could speculate, what was going on with screen time, what was going on at home with parents being home, kids being home, and what about those kids that didn't have parents at home during that time, and
so
whether
pieces came to fruition during.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question related to what you just asked?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, when we're looking at the multilingual learners, that's not cohort data though, right? That's just this is the snapshot this year. So yeah, this is where growth profile kind of data would be super helpful to be able to understand where were they and how far have they gotten over the sense. But yeah, okay.
So that trend with the multilingual learners is not just RCSD.
It's not just RCSD, no. And I had read the research that Texas is doing right now, and it was amazing. Not amazing. It was eye-opening that this participant, one of the funders for the GSE, brought this up to Amado Padilla, and he came and reported to the board about our multilinguals, and especially those in the dual immersion program, if you recall. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. And his response was, we're all wondering what that is. And he just gave what I told you about, the COVID and coming back, and some kids still being really nervous, he said, coming back to school. And so I don't know. Hopefully that research will give us a little eye-opening.
Okay.
There's nothing being done in California, because that's what another question I was at. What about students in California that are in multilingual programs? And he looked at me and I go, not doing anything.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have
Thank you,
anything else?
Jenny. Thank you so much as
Jenny, thanks
always.
for being with us.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure to share the data with you. And honestly, I feel bad that most of the time I'm the one who bring the bad news. So so hopefully we'll see some growth. I'm the first one to see this data. It's like, oh my God, some growth, excited. And I love to bring some good news for a change next time. So I'm looking forward to the data sharing in spring. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And like Elisa, I will be watching too. So for the next week, I'm excited. So okay, thank you. So I just want to check in. It's 9 o'clock. We usually stop for break. How's everybody feeling?
Take just a short break.
Sure. Yeah. Five minutes? Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. For a bit, everybody's back. So we're going to go ahead and start. 7.2 update on the process for appointing a new trustee for Area 3.
Okay, very good. So what we're going to do this evening is go through some information and to look at exactly the process that you would like to utilize for appointing one of our new board members. The beginning of the slides, for lack, I don't have to go through all of these because some of these you've already seen, but I just need to go through a couple. So Rick, let's go down to, let's see, where am I? Background, you're there. Okay, let's go down to the application process. That there. So these are the timelines, and then the applicants themselves. You see that the applicants to date. If you go to the next one, the applicant to dates. As of today, there are 12, and I think Jorge did send you the additional 2. Originally, there were a total of 15, but 3 did not live in trustee area 3. But right now, there are 12 as of today. Let me just go through these real quick. We don't need to go through the individual applicants. I think, you've had that. Let me go to, let's go to the interview process. Let's do that. Now, this, we've been talking about individually, but we have not been able to have a discussion because of the Brown Act, right? So what I want you to pay close attention to here is options for a 30-minute interview process per candidate. You would see that the option A is the flexibility with the follow-up questions, and there are questions that we have put together at this point in time that I believe there are 8 of them. And between Cecilia and David, we utilize some of those questions that are part of the question package. You would have, if you went with option A, that is, they would do it, the candidate would do a 10-minute presentation, and then you could follow up with questions. That 10-minute presentation could be any of the questions that you so desire to ask be part of that presentation, as opposed to just making it open-ended as they did for city council. And I don't know how many of you watched the city council. I watched it, and it was quite open-ended. And to, I think, 3 questions, if I'm not mistaken, there were no slide presentations. It was all verbal of how they were answering those slides.
But they were given two questions.
Two?
They were given
Okay,
two questions and a format to follow. So it was 2-minute introduction, 6
Right,
minutes
right.
on answering these two questions, and then 2-minute closer.
Correct. And so if you look, and that's what we're going to discuss tonight. This is just a draft. And then you could go to option B, and each trustee will ask questions developed by the subcommittee. You would determine which questions you would want to ask, and they would each get X amount of time to respond to that. Normally, what you do start out first as, they give an opening statement. You start your questions. They give X amount of time for questions. You can ask a clarifying piece if they didn't address it properly as you would see fit. And then at the end, you could ask another question if you so desired. But if you ask it, you have to ask it to each candidate. All right. Elisa asked about bilingual. You can ask a question, are you bilingual? Our attorney said there's no problem with that. What she did say, you cannot ask anything about race, about gender, which we talked about. So, and we already knew that. But the process with 12 candidates now, not 10, and we don't know how many more there could be because it stays open until Monday. And I wanted to say, did Jorge send you the questions? Oh my, okay, I think he's online. Yes. Jorge, if you're listening, can you send them the questions, please? I thought we were going to have them so you could see them. Yeah. And these questions were questions that CSBA had some examples. David gave some examples, and Cecilia gave a couple questions. And so it's a combination of all three. So hopefully he will bring them forth so you can see them.
Just while we're waiting, I'll go ahead and I can, if you didn't watch the city council appointment, the candidates were given 10 minutes to give a presentation to the council. They were asked ahead of time to prepare their presentation based on the following questions. 1, opening statement. 2, please share how your experience as a community member in District 4 would be valuable as a member of the city council. 3, thank you, Jorge. 3, what are your thoughts on the city's strategic plan and the council's top priorities, which are equity, housing, transportation, and children and youth? And number 4, closing statement. And candidates were called on in alphabetical order to give their presentations.
I mean, I think with 12 candidates, and we might have a few more that come in, right? Because the deadline is Friday or Monday. Whoa, Monday. So, if we do 30 minutes each, I mean, that already we're at 6 hours. And that even if you had 30 minutes each, then the board actually has to have conversation and do voting. So that's going to take a little while, because assuming we don't all choose the same candidate, then we have to have conversations. It's all in the public. And then we keep revoting until we get we often seek unanimous, but we just need a majority for this, right? So I think as much as we can do ahead of time, the better. And I also like we have the information they sent us. There's other ways of doing it. If we have a list of questions, we could try to prioritize those tonight and send them out to each candidate and have them respond either in a written format or the city council did, is if we could identify a few of the questions that we really care about and ask them to wrap that into their presentation to us. I think we're going to have to try to keep their presentation to us, which includes answering some of the questions that are important to us, to about 10 minutes each. If we've got 12 or 15 or who knows how many candidates, we're going to have to, we're going to have to do our homework ahead of time to really look through each of the applications, decide what we think is important in a board member. I think it's okay if you can individually go out and ask them clarifying questions as well ahead of time. It takes more work for us separately, but I'm just concerned about a 6 or an 8 hour board meeting to decide this. I don't know that we have that in us as a community, because it's not just us as a board,
Right.
it's everybody who has to sit through that.
So with option A, you could send the questions to the applicants ahead of time. The questions, would, as I said, were developed with questions from David, questions from Cecilia, and also from CSBA. And then the applicant presents within 10 minutes, what, if you want all those questions. I wouldn't do all the questions.
I don't think we can do all the questions. I think we need to prioritize a few. Yeah.
Looking at this list that we just got, I feel like some of those were asked in the application also. What motivates your interest in this position? What do you believe are the most significant challenges facing our school district? Those are
they're already in the application. Yeah.
So I think we could pare those down. But to your point, Elisa, yes, I think it's really important that all of us do our homework ahead of time, because all the information is in the applications too. That gives us a lot of information about the candidates. I feel like I've been able to learn a lot about them just by reading all the applications. So I agree that we cannot do 30 minutes per candidate. That's not feasible in one night. We've had a 1 a.m. board meeting before, and I don't want this to be one of those. I feel like a 10-minute presentation, the city council only allowed for 5 minutes of follow-up questions. There are only 2 of their, I guess 6 were present, even asked questions, which I feel like we would probably have more than that. But I'm not sure we need 30 minutes per candidate.
Yeah, I also think that, I'd strongly advocate that we share ahead of time with all the candidates, whatever it is that we're expecting them to answer at the meeting. I think we're going to get a much higher quality answer and a much higher quality, insights into what their perspectives are. So regardless of format, I would say that we would share with them ahead of time anything that we're going to ask them. I do think that 10 minutes is totally fine. Like I felt like even just watching the city council one, I didn't know any of the people, and I felt like I learned a good amount of them as a candidate and what they had done. And many of them didn't even use their 10 minutes. They used like 6 of it or so. So I think that can be an effective way to manage the time. The one thing I did note is that the 2 members that did ask questions asked the same question over and over on the council. So that might be something we do need to take into consideration. And the one other thing on sharing, just not about the high quality, is that it also feels like that's fairer of a process, so that clearly if we're asking the same questions over and over again, candidate 1 has a much bigger disadvantage than candidate 2 and candidate 12, who will have heard it 11 times prior to that. So I think that it's probably really the only reasonable thing to do would be to share whatever we're going to ask in advance.
Right. I think it's fair, because a good board member is somebody who does their homework and they read the board packet, they do all their questions ahead of time, and they come prepared to the board meeting to kind of keep things going. So I don't think we need a gotcha at the meeting to, that's not really part of,
that's not
that's
not our culture.
No,
No.
So yeah. So anyway, I totally agree. It'd be nice just to have a few additional questions that maybe we're digging a little deeper than the application they already gave us. And then the presentation is just to see like how they handle an oral thing, which is part of what we do, is being, publicly able to communicate our thoughts. And
a couple of minutes of unstructured, like where they just do an intro and an outro that they can put what they want in there. So
right. And gives us.
So are you looking like at a 5-minute introduction, a 5-minute closing, where in the 5-minute introduction, it's, basically why they want to be a board member, and the closing, and okay, if they want to recap on anything, plus maybe they forgot something to mention, and that's when they mention it. I don't know. You've got the questions, right? So there are 8 of them.
Real quick at the questions.
There are 8 of them.
Were you thinking that these questions will be addressed in that presentation? Is that
that's
or
you or however they want to present, they can look at present them in a manner that either go one by one or maybe through. When I looked at city council, there were two mic, but when I saw that they didn't take the full 10 minutes, but for a little, when I saw it, I thought that somebody was rambling quite a bit. And I got lost.
It was a suggested format that you do these two things. These are the two questions that the council wanted you to answer. Yeah, I mean, they didn't grade it on, how well did you stick to the format, for sure.
So,
but they were strict on time. Yeah, they were very strict on time, and that was
well. We have to be super consistent, so you can't be. Yeah.
And I haven't watched the city council, but like right now that you mentioned, some of the people didn't even use their 10 minutes. Obviously, and I don't know how many candidates were there. Not
3.
Okay,
3.
But like not 12 or maybe 15, right? So could we, like, I'm thinking, one, I feel interviews are a little intimidating for people. And obviously, when we came in, nobody interviewed us, except for if you did a forum. So when you do a forum, they do give you some questions and then you kind of get ready. I feel we're a family, and so in welcoming them or making them feel a little bit more comfortable, the presentation would probably be not as intimidating as asking all those questions. And again, there's 12 people. By the time we get to the 12th person, right? It just may be, if we give them to them ahead of time, it's not like it's going to be not fair to everybody. I feel the presentation would probably be better. They'll be able to express themselves as they wish and answer the questions perhaps more comfortable than question 1, question 2, question 3. And I just lost my train of thought. But then, I mean, I don't know. I know I heard you said something about presentation. We're talking about city council. I guess the thing would be, do we want to do a presentation? President, do we want to do a presentation or do we want to do the questions? I mean, interview. I would personally say the presentation would probably be best, even though I haven't watched the city council. I think, again, just to make them feel perhaps more comfortable, at least for me. I don't like interviews. So
there are 8 questions, but you wouldn't want to give them all 8 questions. You would want to choose which ones you would want them to present on. And then we could also create a rubric for you, and the rubric would be rationale for interests, relevant skills. It'd be a table. It would be a table, and you give them a score. It'd be a score, maybe 1 being low, 2 being mediocre, 3 being great, and then you determine the rationale for interest. Did they answer that? Relevant skills and experience, interest, activity, and educational community, understanding the role of the board, evaluation experience, communication skills, long-term interest in serving, and decision-making in group. That's part of a rubric that you could utilize also to give you more insight to, is this really the type of person you want to be on the board? And I would just put it in a table for you.
I think that's helpful to have. I've sort of already created one of my own just in going through the. Well, I don't want to send out mine because they might be looking at different things than I am. But yeah, like understanding the role of the board and the superintendent and whatnot.
Well, I can give you these.
But if you want to send that out too, that's helpful.
That would be helpful.
Sure. And then let me know what you want to do, and we'll just create a table.
I mean, I like the idea. I think, Mike, I didn't watch the city council, but I like the idea of we ask each candidate to prepare remarks to us. They know that we have the application, and that we'd like them to address, why do you want to be a board member in their response? And then a couple of the other questions, and then whatever else they want to tell us, right? What they think is important. And then, but to give them the questions ahead of time, so they just sort of incorporate that into their talk with us. And then I suppose so what you're saying is if we have individual questions, like there may be some follow-up to whatever they say, we're not allowed to ask one of them something. That seems very odd because they're going to say different things. And so you may want to.
If it's a clarification to a response, you want them maybe, can you tell me more about that? I really don't understand. Can you elaborate a bit? Or can you give me an example?
Yeah.
That you don't have to ask of each one. But if it's a specific question, like, are you bilingual? You would ask every one of them.
Okay. Well, that's where I think if we give them the 3 to 5 questions that we feel like are really important that they cover, well, they should have covered it, right? And if they didn't cover it, then, well, could we then ask the follow-up, like you didn't say anything about this?
If it's part of the question, yeah.
Yeah. I just think it'll flow better than if because in their opening remarks, some of them are going to cover these questions. It would be a natural to cover a lot of these things, right, in your opening remarks, because it's really about why you want to be a school board member. A lot of these are just details around that, right? And so it just feels like it's more efficient if we just give them, make sure that these are the questions we care about, make sure they're incorporated into your remarks. And some of them are going to have strengths in some areas, so they may highlight those.
I know what I was gonna say. So since Mike, you mentioned that some of the people in the council didn't use their 10 minutes. I don't know, but could we say 6 minutes for their presentation with 4 to 5 minutes, which would make it 10 or 11 minutes, even if we were to ask questions, and then that way it won't be too long.
I mean, the city council, this was to do a replacement for someone who had left the council. And again, we can do whatever we want, but their format was 10-minute presentation, 5-minute of council questions. So it was always going to be no more than a 15-minute block. And the questions that got asked there were basically only 2 questions asked by just 2 members, as Janet said. One was, what was the...
They had like an info meeting.
Yeah.
And how did you feel about that?
How did you feel about the info meeting?
And then the other one was what regional committees would you
be what regional committee? So like a role related thing, which actually is a pretty good question, like which one would you want to, which committee would you want to take on as a board member? So, and then they just asked those, but it went pretty quickly.
I guess my thoughts would be a presentation, and we could even tell them 5 to 10 minutes. Like, not that they have to speak for 10.
Yeah, or just up to 10.
Up to 10, like you said, up to 10 minutes, yeah.
We just have to set the timer at a specific time. So we'll set it for 10 minutes and use.
Yeah, I'll be good about that. I'll have my timer up.
I've seen you with 3 computers going and timers and everything. So
I did, yeah. And then it's just how much time do we want to allot ourselves for follow-up questions? Do we feel like 5 minutes is enough? Because I'm guessing that we will have specific questions we also want to ask them. It may not be part of what we ask in the presentation.
So if we did 10 minutes, we're looking at 240, so 4 hours.
And follow-up, and including the follow-up questions, because remember, when you ask the follow-up question, it has to be asked to each one.
Yeah. So I was thinking like that took about 10 minutes. Everybody asked a 2-minute question.
I mean, there's so much. Like, why didn't you? Anyway, should we do like, say 4 questions and then think of maybe 2 more if we were to ask, and then that's a total of 6 instead of like 10 or 12 questions. So 6, whether it's 4, 5, or 6 questions, so that they can actually do their presentation based on those questions. So they should be able to express what they want to say based on them getting the questions ahead of time, or whether it's questions or a theme or whatever, however we want to call it. And then again, maybe we just ask, I don't know, 1 really good questions or 2. But again, there's so much of this.
Well, I'm also wondering, if we're going to ask specific questions, why are we doing the presentation and not just doing an interview style? I still think the presentation is the right way to go. I think it's just picking out what we want them to address is the important part. And then we won't have, hopefully, more questions to ask besides just a clarification?
I think that's a good goal to have, is try and get what the things that we're interested in hearing, have them included in the presentation.
Yeah.
And then just leave a little bit of time for clarification.
I think that's the right.
I think that's the most fair for the candidates too, because then they all have the same amount of time to think about the question and come in prepared, as opposed to, you know, again, candidate number 2 hearing, you know, Elisa's question for the first time when candidate number 1 is presenting, and then, you know, so.
Well, and then another thing that I did mention to Dr. Baker is, had they submitted an application and done a ballot, they have a choice if they want to do a personal statement. And usually as a voter, you read that statement. You don't ask them questions because sometimes you don't even know who these people are. So maybe we don't ask any more questions and they just maybe do a thorough presentation.
So if everybody has the questions in front of them, are there some that stand out to you in particular that you would want them to include in a presentation?
I like 1 and 8. If we were only to pick 2, those would be the 2 that I'd pick.
Okay, so for the public, I guess we should probably read these out loud, right? So number 1 says, what experience do you have with education, and what sources do you use to learn more about how children learn and what best practices exist? And number 8 says, how would you ensure that the voices of all community members, including those from underrepresented groups, are heard in the board's decision-making process? Number 8's a definite for me, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I really like number 8. I like number 1 as well. I would like to know from each candidate if they speak any other languages than English. I don't know how other people feel. I mean, we've had a lot of conversation about how Cecilia has done a lot of work with our Spanish-speaking families. Oh. Yeah, I just, the reason I'd like to ask about other languages than English is that the board, we've had a lot of conversation about how much we rely on Cecilia as our only board member that is completely fluent in Spanish, and she's able to talk to our Spanish-speaking families in a way that we're not able to. I mean, of course, we talk to them through translators and that sort of thing. So, you know, not just Spanish, but I would personally be interested if they speak any other language. I don't know how other people feel about that, but that is a part of my, it's not necessarily the highest priority in terms of who I think will be a good board member, but I do think you know, if everything else is equal, that could be an outstanding component for me. I will say the other thing is, everything else is equal. I also think the representation, the geographic representation, if they have students in our district, which schools they're attending, because we have had on our board over time where you have a majority of the board and all their children are at one school. And I believe that the individuals on the board have always tried to have, you know, care about every student, but whether it's a real thing or a perception thing, it can be an issue for the community. If we had a majority of board members and all their students go to one school, we've already heard from a few people that they have concerns with that. So there's a couple that are a little bit different than this list. For me, it would be other languages, and also what schools you have most familiarity with. Maybe that's the way to talk about it, because some of the individuals who have applied do not have students in the school now, or who have, or you know, they've
or have ever,
or have never.
So in addition to just what's in the application, you mean?
Yeah, so in the application, I believe we've got all of that school information, right? I've seen it, I think, for everybody. Yeah. So that we have, so we don't have the languages. So yeah. So you're right, we don't need to ask about that then. That doesn't have to be a.
I would think number 7 would be important. Do you want me to read it so the public can hear?
I like that one.
So can you describe a time when you advocated for equity in a professional or volunteer capacity? I like number 4 too.
I do too.
To be honest with you,
we're gonna have to give more than 10 minutes.
This is why it's like so hard, right? Because like, although number 1, yes, you want to know what experience, but what happens to the kid, to the parents? Like, say if some of them, and I don't remember like grade wise, right? Like they have a kindergartner and they're just starting and somehow they want to get involved, but they have no experience. but maybe they do have a vision for the future. So that's why I like number 4.
I don't know how many questions we're wanting to pick out.
I mean, I think we can keep 7. Describe a time when you advocated for equity and replace and not include 8. I think that you'll get some of the similar answers from that one.
Okay.
You know, I know you were saying it's a must, and I had suggested it as well, but I think that, you know, number 7 is just asking for give a real world example.
Sure, I think those are tied together,
Yeah.
so I think one or the other is fine. 7 or 8.
Oh. Well, one of them is sort of giving an example in the past, right? Or what you do, whereas 8 is actually forward thinking in that. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that they're kind of similar. But I do think 8 is sort of more the vision of what you would do as a board member to ensure. So it's more forward thinking, whereas I think 7 is giving an example of what you've done professionally or volunteer.
Can we do all 4 questions?
Or
4,
Can they
7, and
answer
8?
all 4
Can
in
they
10 minutes? Is a better
I
question.
think we could drop number 1 then and focus on what's their vision and
Yeah.
equity and go from
Yeah.
there.
I think the first part of number 1 is sort of answered in that application.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so maybe it's 4, 7, and 8.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
So you're looking at 4, 7, and 8.
And I think, you know, I think what we're saying is that they don't necessarily have to call out the individual question, that we're hoping that they would incorporate that into their presentation, right?
Yeah.
So I would make it more of a, well, I guess, yeah, what is your, you know, you make sure in your presentation that you tell us what your vision is for the future of the school district, yada, yada, yada. Please, you know, describe a time when you advocated for equity in a professional or volunteer capacity, and then how would you ensure the voices of all community, you know, just include that in their presentation. It should come up anyway, I would think, in what they're going to tell us, as long as they know that's important to us, right?
Yeah.
So we're again 4, 7, and 8.
Mm-hmm. So, and just a basic introduction,
Mm-hmm.
and then addressing 4, 7, and 8, and then anything else they think, yeah, we might want to know.
We have a lot of information in the application already,
Yeah.
too. So, but one other thing, I think we should be really clear on process too, about like, when are we taking public comment? Is that going to happen before candidates, after candidates, things like that?
The attorney said it was what she said is what she asked me the question, what do you do now? And I said, if an item is on the agenda many times, we'll wait until till that item comes up. And like if it's a report or something, we let the report go first, and then the questions come from the audience. If the item is not on the agenda, it's during the beginning.
I think in this situation, though, I would prefer to take them before the presentations like the city council did. My concern is if we wait, I mean, I don't know how many, if any, we'll have. I think that if we get a significant number of people that want to speak to about a specific candidate, the gap between us hearing from the candidates and when we actually get to talk could be problematic, I think, for us having a solid discussion. If we're going to have one, I don't know.
I mean, the only issue with allowing them to go first is we could be flooded with comments on candidates, and I'd rather hear from the candidates and be fresh in my thinking around that. Yeah, I get what you mean. I mean, I don't know how many people are gonna.
There were quite a few in the city council. I don't know how many, maybe 10.
Yeah.
All kind of repeating the same thing.
That's interesting. We didn't have anybody come the last time we did this, appointed a person. We didn't have any public members advocating for individuals, because that changes the whole dynamics. It's interesting.
But that was probably because it was not recorded, and
that's true.
People were just, it was different the way, I mean, yeah, it went out to the public, but now a lot more parents and community members know about meetings.
And I'm not saying I'm anticipating a lot. I'm just saying that we should just be like, make that decision now instead of like trying to call it on game day.
Could we wait? We wait and see how many we have?
How many
But-
questions?
No, how many people who want to comment? Because
Oh.
my only concern is if like you had 20 or 30 and providing each of them, I guess, a minute to talk.
Wouldn't it be the same amount of minutes that we provide during a board meeting?
Which is true.
Well,
So if we have
if we get
certain
up
number,
there-
we reduce the amount of time.
Yeah, so if it's under 10, then we'd give them 3 minutes. If it's
Mike or Cecilia, do you have a preference?
I'd prefer it before for the same reason that you said, which is kind of like, then we can go in, hear from the candidates, and then move on into the final discussion.
I'm with me too.
Okay. So I guess since the majority of us are asking for it before.
that's fine.
it's-
I'm fine
Okay.
with that. Yeah.
So then public questions, if they do come forward, will come before.
Correct.
All right.
Yes.
And because there are 12 right now, you can take a recess, have a break. If you like, you can do that. Yeah, Lauren said that's possible. We just have to make them aware of that in the beginning.
Okay, so go ahead.
Is this the only thing on the agenda or is there more stuff?
Well, the only items that we'll put on the agenda that night are consent items. That's it. Nothing with action. I've already told all cab members nothing with action. Only consent.
Do we want to do that first or last? Almost first, just to
If
get.
any staff members have to stick around.
Yeah, we can
yeah,
do it first.
just
We can do it first. We can do that first.
Okay.
Janet, you're the one running the process for it. Do you have all the information you need?
I'm
Yeah.
good.
Okay,
Yeah, I
yeah.
feel like I know what I'm doing.
So we'll write this up for you and send it to you so you have it. And so just again, it's 4, 7, 8. And the presentation is, did you say 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, up to
Up
10
to 10.
minutes.
Up to.
And when will you send those questions out? Are you
Um,
going to wait until after it closes?
Wait until after it closes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll go up in the next week.
Okay.
After.
Now, you had talked about starting earlier.
Right. So we had all talked about that individually, and it looks like it may be better for us to start probably at 4 o'clock. Can you do 4 o'clock, Mike?
I'll make it work. Yeah.
So, and my only concern about that is for our candidates and their jobs, whether or not.
Well, I think what we can do right now is to let them know, like tomorrow or by the end of this week, the interviews will begin at 4. And when you begin the interviews, Lauren said, and the city council did this also, it's best to go by last name, alphabetical order.
So if we have a candidate who cannot make it at 4 o'clock, is it possible for them to let us know ahead of time and I'll say I'll bump them to the end of the list? Are we okay with that? But I would say I need to know ahead of time before.
Oh, you would.
Yeah.
You would. Because it closes on Monday, next week on Monday. Hope we can get this out probably on Tuesday.
Okay. Is everybody okay with 4? You said you.
Yeah. I'll make it work.
Yeah.
That
was my answer too.
Yeah. There's enough advance notice, and I feel a cop coming on, so I'm just kidding.
And do we know if David can make it at that time?
He was going to try. He was going to really try, because I said it could be as early as first. I said 5, and I said as more came in, I said it could be 4.
Mm-hmm.
To my best. So.
Okay. Okay. I think we have everything we need.
Cool.
Do you have everything you need?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great.
And the opening was what, 5 minutes? Did you decide on the openings remarks? 2 minutes?
Part of the 10.
Up to 10.
Part of the 10.
It's all 10.
Includes answering those questions.
Okay, it includes the answering the question, your opening and your closing.
Yeah, up to 10 minutes.
And thank you, Jorge, for getting those questions to us.
Yeah.
And I've seen you following along and highlighting and whatnot.
Yeah.
So.
And all the candidates that are interested in the role.
And then another thing, and just like super random, but like how many seats do we have and how many people fit in here? Because then our candidate is gonna want to bring like for support system, because this is so different than like just a regular interview. Do we have to let them know like,
70 coming.
okay,
That's it.
just like don't
Everybody
bring.
else watch,
your
everybody else
family
watch
and
from home. Everybody else has to.
Because then we'll, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
If we have,
Sit in the lobby, yeah.
right, if we have too many, I think we can pipe the sound into the lobby.
It is piped into.
But also families can rotate in and out as.
Yeah. There's only 70, and remember fire marshal.
Yes.
Do we remember that night?
I don't think I was on the board, but I still remember the story.
Remember that night?
Which night? That was when the
Fire marshal
came
came.
down. Oh my gosh, there were so many people.
And then somebody
here.
fainted out there, remember?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay, we're not gonna have that happen.
People outside. Very.
Okay, we ready to move on?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank
We
you.
are on consent calendar.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. 9.1, adoption of resolution number 6, approval of Ed Code and Title V options for teaching assignments for the 24-25 school year.
Any questions?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Yeah, I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. 9.2, approval of 23-24 unaudited actuals.
Any questions? You don't get off that easy. After all.
Exactly, up to 10 minutes.
Yeah. With no clarifying questions, right? Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we are presenting the fiscal year 2023-2024 unaudited actuals. This is an annual event in September where we bring forward numbers after the closing of the books for the previous fiscal year. On our normal graph here that's shown at every meeting with the highlighted prior year unaudited actuals with the green star tonight, and the children who never seem to age are included
true.
again. This is, the start of the fiscal year for us still. We're now preparing getting ready to start the work on the first interim report, which will come back in December. Tonight, traditionally has highlighted only the unaudited actuals and the changes from our, our estimated actuals at budget adoption. But I did add a couple of extra slides in tonight, highlighting the multi-year projections and the changes based on what we did through the process of preparing the unaudited actuals. So I've kind of gone through most of this slide already. It really shows how many revenues actually, how much in revenue actually came in versus the expenditures that were actually incurred during the year. As a reminder, when we prepare the budget for public viewing and ultimate adoption in June, we're using numbers that are, coming really from April and May as we prepare that. So there's, 1 to 2 months of services that are being provided to students. There's expenditures taking place, purchase orders that are closing out, contracts that we don't know whether or not we're going to fully expend those funds. And then we have the process of trying to track that all down after June 30th with invoices and billing that come at that time for services provided in the previous year. As always, our financial statements, now that this is complete, will be audited and verified by our external auditors. I believe they come on site the 3rd week of October to start the final portion of the audit this year, which will be presented to the board for acceptance in January. I've already gone through this slide too. It must be getting late. I'm jumping way ahead. This is just simply a list of the funds that we have in the district that we prepared the unaudited actuals for, as we do on an annual basis. This is our updated revenue slide showing approximately 141.7 million in revenue. There'll be some more detail on a couple of slides that will show where those changes occurred. Our expenditures for unaudited actuals is 150.9 million. And then going through here, just a reminder of what those expenditure categories are on a broad level. And it shows on here that for 23-24, we spent about 75.2% of our expenditures on all of our district employees, right? So that doesn't include our contractors, but it includes our certificated, including our teachers, our classified, as well as our management for the district. The 75.2% includes salaries plus benefits, both health and welfare and statutory benefits the district either contributes to or pays in full. So here's a snapshot of our general fund 01, starting with adopted budget in 23-24 through estimated actuals and unaudited actuals, where you can see approximately 1.4 million. I won't say in new revenue, but fully accounted for revenue for the 23-24 school year. And then our expenditures, where you see, I'll say significant savings or recouping of those expenditures, mainly from positions that were still budgeted for but weren't filled, or positions that were filled by contractor but still had a position on the books that we were able to close out and finalize for the end of the fiscal year. On this slide, it shows the net change in ending fund balance of approximately $5 million. On here is just a snapshot at budget adoption. We showed for the 24-25 fiscal year what we anticipated our revenue and expenditures would be. And this is simply a snapshot of what was received and spent in 23-24. This slide is the key for the next slide, grouping together some of the more notable items in our budget, where we tie together both certificated and classified salaries. And that first one really looking at what's going in terms of teachers and classroom support services. Through this, the only one that we didn't break out and put into specific groups would be like the benefits and the retirement. Those are still individual strands on this chart, showing the impact there. That would be a little bit, I'll say, more time consuming, not harder to do with how some of the funding occurs for our benefits and retirement. I did break out what's our 5,000 series, our contracted services, to show that about 13 million of that is turning the lights on, so to speak, in other OpEx costs. And about 19 million of those contracted services are going towards people supports. So that could be, counselors, it could be special education supports, and other contracted services. So, it's not $32 million of just, maintenance and insurance and that sort of thing, but it's really the majority of that money is going towards people support services. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we don't normally put multi-year projections in the unaudited actuals report, but I thought it was important in light of some of the things that will be happening this fall with the budget renewal process and really showing the impact of finalizing those numbers for the 23-24 fiscal year. You'll notice that it changed to unaudited actuals on the header up there rather than estimated actuals. And I'm just going to point out a couple of key things on this slide. One, we were able to reduce our transfers in from Fund 25 from 9.3 million in 23-24 to 8.3 million. And then in 24-25, we were able to reduce that from, I believe it was 9.875 million on the transfer end down to 7.3 at this time. As always, 23-24 is set now, but 24-25 isn't, right? So that number will fluctuate and likely go down as we realize either savings or non-expenditures in 24-25. One thing that we did carry forward from 23-24, even with the big reduction in I'll say estimated versus actuals, was we didn't have a CSA settlement in 23-24. We had a CSA settlement on, I believe, July 3rd or 4th officially, and which has retro pay for 23-24. So we did carry that on the bottom line for an assignment of the excess funds that we had from the 23-24 unaudited versus estimated actuals. Another point on the slide that I wanted to make under the fiscal stabilization plan, where you can see the cells highlighted in light green, at budget adoption for 25-26, that was $7.5 million. And for 26-27, it was roughly the same, a couple $100,000 difference. So we were able to lower what we'll have to find for our fiscal stabilization plan. And as a reminder, if we make ongoing reductions, that will cancel out essentially the 4.6 million in 26-27. If they were all to be one-time savings, then we would have an additional 4.6 million in 26-27. Also of note, if we go back up to the transfers in, you'll note in 25-26 and 26-27, we are doing this without any additional transfers in from Fund 25. So whereas I believe Trustee Lawson said earlier, as we're right-sizing the budget and doing that work, one of our goals was to eliminate the transfer in of Fund 25. So ultimately that money will be able to be used for other things in the district in the future, facilities related, not classroom or salary related. So there is some requirements of the use of that money, but the goal was not to transfer that in the out years, which we were able to do at this point. On here, simply showing that we are making the economic reserve, or the reserve for economic uncertainty, last fiscal year as well as current, and the 2 out years with those noted fiscal stabilization plan measures on the previous slide. The unassigned, unappropriated ending balance, really that will fluctuate as well. By first interim, it will not be $215,000 or 1,986. That will change as we get more information as we go through this fiscal year. This slide is to show the difference between estimated and actuals in all of our other major fund balances. And so moving forward in October, the budget renewal process begins. I always get this wrong, but I believe the first meeting is the 16th or the 6th. I'm not off the top of my head. I don't have it right now. December, we'll be presenting obviously the work from the budget renewal process, but also the first interim report for approval. And then continuing on with additional budget decisions for 25-26 and the second interim presented to the board in March. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rick. Anybody have questions? We appreciate your work and your staff's work, of course, as always.
Thank you.
All right, I guess we can move on then. Oh, we need to wait. It is an action item.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, now we can move on. 9.3, adoption of resolution number 7 to adopt the GAN limit.
Good evening again. Tonight is a resolution for the GAN appropriations limit, or commonly referred to as the GAN limit. The GAN limit sets the expenditure threshold for the state as well as local and county entities, including local school districts. On this, based on the information provided from the unaudited actuals and our expected expenditures in 24-25, this resolution states that we will or we are going to increase our GAN limit by approximately $374,000. If approved, this will be sent to the Department of Finance, which will increase our GAN limit for 24-25, as well as contribute to the state's increase in their GAN limit for 24-25 as well. There is no fiscal impact to the district on this, nor does it impact or affect any programs or services offered by the district.
Any questions?
Looks like routine business that's done every year. So I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Reports from board members and superintendent.
I don't think I have anything to report this time.
Let's see, Cecilia and I attended the Superintendent Advisory Committee meeting, and we mostly heard about the budget right sizing that we'll be doing and a few other sort of budget related things, seeking out volunteers. Right. I don't know if you got any from that, but and then the only other thing I wanted to mention is I will be in Sacramento this weekend with CSBA for the board meeting. So if there's anything that you want me to bring up, let me know. And I'll report back.
So the other thing that I have to, well, I mentioned I attended the DLAC meeting at Hoover. So they rotate, and the next one will be at Garfield. I forget the date, but and Catherine went over the letter that gets sent out to parents. What do you call it?
Reclassification.
What is it?
Reclassification.
No, not the reclassification.
Oh, the Title I.
There you go. Yeah. So she went over. I mean, we didn't have a big turnout of parents, but we're looking forward to the next one. So that's it.
Thank you for attending that.
Mm-hmm. I do not have anything to report.
Well, I already reported on the Stanford presentation today. Anna and I met with a group from Mexico that Jeff Lee brought. He sent an email, and Evelyn got him on our calendar with this group that was visiting from Michoacan. What was
that? Was the Mexican delegation.
Mexican delegation. Mexican delegation, but certain cities, Michoacan, and then, oh my, you need to write them down. To try and see if we can become like he called it pen pals with, schools in that arena, and possibility of having a teacher come and visit one of our schools and one of our teachers visit one of their schools. And it was just to create this relationship. So Anna did a wonderful job of giving them the information in regard to our programs that we have here in the Redwood City School District that serves many of those children that their parents come, when they came from those towns and cities.
Is this part of the sister city?
That's what it is. Yeah. He did the same thing for the Mandarin program.
Right, exactly. I mean, that makes sense if our community just to have that collaboration.
So there was
thank you.
There was that. And Redwood City Together, the executive meeting I attended. We're doing something a little bit different with the strategy map with Raphael to see if we can't kind of bring things more together, where more of those of us who are members are involved in what is happening, because it's not taking place. It's little groups here, little groups there. Like, I had no idea. I still have no idea. Like I told Raphael, there's a committee on early learning or preschool or something. We don't have a representative that goes there. I said, we're not at the table, and we're one of your core partners. And they're always talking about the data. We've got data, but nobody else wants to do anything. So we have to redo this in a manner that everybody gets to be involved. Otherwise, why are we even there? So the group seemed to internalize it and understand it. Kaiser, wants to be really involved with us, in a manner, especially when it comes to our Hispanic community being going to physicals, getting, the different types of vaccinations and so forth. So they want the doctor that sits on that group with me would like to have that partnership. So that's good because I don't see Kaiser at all in anything that we put in place. So we're trying to do something a bit different, and we'll bring it back to the larger group once everybody is agreeable. And that's it. Oh, the Orion Growth Plan. There was a meeting last week. We're not far yet.
Great, thank you. 11.1, information on San Mateo County Investment Fund. Are there any questions? Correspondence. We've gotten some emails about air conditioning. I think that's it. That's all I've gotten. Possible other business suggested items for future agenda. Elisa, you don't want to add future items?
Just start adding it. That was great. Candidate, I should start adding it. No, I don't.
Okay. Changes to the board meeting calendar. Changes. Great. We're a little past 10 o'clock. Sorry about that. We're supposed to take a vote to extend. So 10:04.